Hi, welcome back guys. This is your sensei, back with another fanfiction. This is the second part of What If Naruto Fell in Love with Witch. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. This is your scheme, then? Naruto nodded. Best thing I could think of, really. Ranni felt a smile touch her lips. A faint smirk, some might have called it. She would have slaughtered anyone who said such, of course, but that was neither here nor there. This was a sound scheme. All things considered, her dear consort was nothing if not thorough when it came to saving others. But such plans seldom survived contact with the enemy. Who could say whether his would be the same? The track to Caelid would be a long one. Any number of things could go wrong. Naruto sensed her fear, of course. Clasped two of her 4 hands in his. Have some faith in me. Her remaining duo clasped over his in turn, holding tight. It's not a matter of faith. Belief, then. He pressed his forehead to hers and laughed, cheeky boy that he was. It felt nice. Very nice indeed. His words, less so. I believe we'll win. That's all there is to it. He really was too bold for his own good. Her spirit fluttered and she cursed softly. Another ersatz emotion she had no control over. The heart wants what the heart wants, as they say, and hers most assuredly had a mind of its own. It wanted to be loved, to be held and feel it, not some flimsy facsimile. The urge burned in her even now, demanding release. Naruto released her hands and walked away. Too late she realized she'd lost her chance. Hold a moment. He paused, 1 foot over the threshold, and looked back at her. She pinned him with a steely glance. If it comes to your life or his. Naruto flashed her a cheery grin. I won't die, Ranni, she huffed. How can you be so certain? He shrugged. Just him. That's all there is to it. Such staunch certainty. He truly feared nothing. Ordinarily, she didn't mind that blasé attitude. It was usually inconsequential in the greater scheme of things. But not here. Not today. Not against Radahn. Her brother was strong, perhaps the strongest of the demigods. Even in his maddened, rotten state, he still held some semblance of his wits about. Still held back the stars, despite it all. Odd how such a concern had become secondary to her now. But if her brother held even a third of his old strength, he'd cleave Naruto in two. She'd seen him do it before. He'd go it again, given the chance. And still, Naruto acted like he wasn't a threat. She scowled at him for it. You must take this seriously, mine consort. I am. He shrugged. I'm seriously going to Caelid, and I'm seriously gonna save him. Her temper sparked. Spoken like a man who has never tasted death. You cannot be certain this will work. Blue eyes met hers. I know death. His words were the fangs of a great fox, biting right through her anger and tearing it to pieces. In that moment, her heart stopped. What? I said I know death. There it was again, the painful twist in her once more. More than you could possibly know. Do not trifle with me. I'm not. Naruto pushed off the wall, stepped to her, and planted one hand against the door. Really, I ain't. She cursed her lack of height as he towered over her. Blast it all. Why did he have to be too tall? She'd never felt so small in her life. Why did her face feel so blasted warm? But he was still speaking and she must attend. In terms of death, I've nearly bit the bullet more than once. Her brow furrowed. You lie. Nope. His smile was the saddest thing she'd seen in quite some time. I could tell you so many more stories, tales to chill your very soul. My heart stopped, my body's been burnt, I've nearly had my mind broken. I've taken so many injuries that I no longer remember them all. So yes, I know death. Seen it, tasted it, so many times. I'll never forget. Likewise, I've killed before, even when I didn't want to. He stepped in, wrapped both arms round her and pulled her into his. You know I have. Those stern words didn't waver, even as he held her. I've already told you some. That's I want you to believe me, to believe in me. His hands curled around hers, when I say I'm not gonna die. All right. Ranni looked away, tugging her hat down over her eyes. Had she a proper body, her face would have been absolutely incandescent. Damn him and damn his silver tongue. Double damn him for sparking these feelings in her. I will trust in you, then. Nevertheless, she whirled out his grasp, jabbed a finger against his. I shall say it again. Should it come to you or him, if you must choose between yourself or Radahn, choose correctly. His face closed down, brightened soon thereafter. Oh, dear. He was going to say something foolish again, wasn't he? Sure enough, he surprised her. Don't worry, he fed her a thumbs up. I'll choose you. Ranni's mind fizzled. Had she a heart of flesh, it would have been doing flips in her right about now. Backflips, entire cartwheels, that sort of thing. As it stood, her soul burned. It was the most absurd, ridiculous, corny thing she'd ever heard. So why was she swooning? She was a princess, a demigod. She was no mere maiden to be swayed so, and yet the way he looked at her, it did things to her. Foul, treacherous thing. Still, was all well and good, wasn't it? He'd simply professed his loyalty to her. She chose to interpret it as such, even if she secretly knew otherwise. As you should, she sputtered. Such is expected of you. Pearly white teeth flashed in a rueful grin. And there's that tsundere again. Her good eye narrowed upon him. You've used that word before. Whatever does it mean? Nothing. I would have you answer me. She grabbed him by his jacket. What is this tsundere you speak of? Nothing important. His grin became decidedly cheeky. Even so, I'm pretty sure I'd want to marry him. Blue eyes widened and he coughed harshly into a fist, silencing himself before quickly changing the subject. In any case, isn't it about time we get ready? We've got a long walk ahead of us. Distracted or no, Ranni wasn't fool enough to miss that. Her soul stilled. He'd almost said another word just now. What marriage was he talking about? Marriage? No, nay, surely not. Her world spun as her imagination produced a girlish squeal and ran away with the words. She ruthlessly chased that fleeting fancy down, caught it, wrangled it under control once more, and murdered it. Only then did she dare speak. Art thou really satisfied with a wretched witch such as myself? His eyes met hers. The air felt charged between them. Only one thing for it, then. Her hands cupped his face. His head dipped down. They shared a chaste. Once again she cursed this blasted body of hers. She could feel only a vague sensation of pressure as she returned his affections, a faint tingling numbness in her hands when she held him. Nothing more, nothing less. How she loathed this form of hers. She wanted to feel. No matter. It wouldn't be a problem much longer. After Radahn, she promised herself. Once her brother was dealt with, one way or another, she would consent and ascend to God, have let him craft her a new body, and use her ring to be hopefully free of the finger's influence once and for all. Then came Nokron. With the finger slayer blade in hand, she would slay them and be free, consequences be damned. And Fenno, don't think about her imminent departure. That way lay another argument. Ranni, my apologies, she drew away with a low murmur. I know I am not the most expressive sort. I am unused to feeling this way. And she'd never fallen in love before. Now that she had, she wanted him all to herself. She wanted to lock him, keep him safe, but he'd never let her. Forgive me, he grinned. Ain't nothing to forgive. Then, I shall allow thee to court me truly. Wait, Naruto blinked. You mean we weren't already? She looked away and muttered something softly. Naruto heard it. He fell over, hands clasping his stomach, and began to roll around, laughing near hysterically. His feet kicked wildly in the air. Stop that! She delivered a feeble kick to his ribs. He only howled louder. Forget what thou heard, forget. He truly had ruined her. But perhaps this wasn't so bad. There were few things Rykard feared in the lands between. He'd committed all manner of blasphemy and heresy without blinking, without hesitation, knowing they were necessary. Granted, he had lost himself along the way, but even so, all that he'd done, all that he would ever do, was for the sole sake of destroying the greater will. And so he'd carried out his task without fear, until he came, until things changed, until he found his ambitions undone. Now he felt fear once more, but for an entirely different reason. Here was an enemy he could not hope to face, a foe against which he stood no chance, yet he must face them. Steeling his heart, he pushed the door open. Sure enough, he found Mother within. He heard her long before he saw her. Grandmother, please, a familiar voice whined. Not so tight. Aren't you just precious, she cooed, cuddling a baffled Raya in her arms. My first grandchild, though, your hair is just lovely. Ryan whined a little. Rykard hid a smile behind his hand. He pitied his child, truly, he did, but Raya had served as an admirable distraction for the past few days. Her sacrifice had given him time to muster his words, if not necessarily his nerve. He'd stalled, lingered, fobbed everyone off with excuses while Mother fussed over Tanith and Raya. No longer. Even if he didn't do this here and now, even if he didn't face her before marching off to Caelid, Ranni would tear strips out his hide. To say nothing of Naruto himself. Fire and damnation. Nothing for it, then. He coughed into a fist, drawing their attention. Dropped to a knee before them both. I have returned to thee, Mother. He bowed his head, touching the floor. Please, forgive me mine transgressions. Runala dropped Raya. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly. Rykard, oh gods, she was furious. Mother, please, I know you must be angry. No use. She was upon him, no, but where was the pain? My baby boy. Act, Mother, please. Runala really did give powerful hugs. Blasted blonde. This was all Naruto's fault. He'd be having words with him about this. While Celevis scowled at his helper. Do you have it? They pressed the item into his hands. Excellent. What are your intentions toward my sister? It was the most Rykard had said to him since his salvation. He'd given him credit for that. Naruto craned his neck back and kept walking, idly eyeing the scarlet sky ahead of them. Thought that was pretty obvious already. A bearded redhead scowled at him, moved to match his pace. I would have it said, do you love her? Naruto nearly missed a step. Ahead of them, Blade actually tripped. Ranni, walking several paces ahead of them, heard none of it. Thank heaven for small mercies. He was sure she'd have words for the lot of them if she caught Rykard prattling on like this. Eventually, the whiskered warrior found his voice once more. I think so. Do you know? Rykard remained relentless, his glare fierce. She deserves to be with one who would love her, know her, see her journey through to the end. He frowned. And I will. Yet you will not be able to save Radahn. A seed of anger sprouted in Naruto's. He stifled it. I've heard those words before, you know. He clasped both hands behind his head, never once slowing his pace. They always say that. You can't help me, Naruto. You can't save me, Naruto. You don't understand, Naruto. It's just not possible. But something's only impossible until someone does it. Finwell, a wry grin touched whiskered cheeks. It becomes possible. You are rather known for that. See, this was why he liked Kurama. He understood. Rykard's growl drew him back. You know nothing. This foolishness will get you killed. I saved you, didn't I? The demigod looked to the east, where the sky still lay stained with scarlet. Despite my protests. And I'll save Radahn, too. He reached around, tugged up his hood, obscuring all but his lower face from view. He felt the strength of Ranni's subtle spells woven into the cloth, empowering him further. Whiskered cheeks dimpled in a smile. I'm gonna save everyone, whether they like it or not. Rykard quirked a brow. even if such foolishness kills you. Even then. But it won't. I've planned for this. Very well. I take it you have a plan. He patted his pouch. Of a sort. What's in there? Something just crazy enough to work or see him chopped into small pieces. Hopefully the former. If not, he had at least 3 different plans he could try, assuming the first 2 didn't succeed. Radahn would not find him lacking. He knew what he was walking into today. Some might call it hell. Perhaps it was. But he'd seen worse. In the end, he settled for a simple answer. Stuff. The demigod's glower intensified. You're not going to tell me, are you? Nope. Rykard glared pale daggers at him. Thou art truly a fiend. That was low-hanging fruit, but he couldn't help himself. Your sister thinks otherwise. Indeed she does. Ranni's voice chimed ahead of them. And she would prefer you stop talking about her behind her back. Rykard stomped on ahead. The rest of their trek to Caelid was made in comparative silence. Naruto began to whistle as they walked, without a care in the world. Ranni's brother glared at him the whole way. Indeed, the last leg of the march proved a brisk, if silent one. Soon enough, they found the castle. Its gates hung open for them. In silence, they advanced. And so it began. Champion's welcome. Ranni knew that voice, knew it well. She'd not heard it in an age, but still, she remembered it. The stars have aligned sure enough. A familiar figure awaited them on the pad as they slipped into the main plaza. The festival is nigh. His armor was worn, his stance slouched, but she knew that old could anywhere. His words only confirmed it. General Radahn, mightiest demigod of the Shattering, awaits you. Well, well, Blade rumbled behind her. Seems he's still kicking. Naruto made a quizzical sound. Who? Rykard shushed him. Champions, prepare for battle yet again. The Castellans called down to them and the other combatants, heedless of their ascent up the stained stairwell. Defeat the general, claim glory, and grab that great rune. Ever the eccentric, this one. He really knew how to whip up a crowd. A celebration of war, the Radahn festival. Ranni broke the tableau with soft sigh. That's quite enough, Jaren. What have we here? The old swordsman whipped around. That's a name I haven't heard in an age. And I know that voice. She couldn't see his eyes behind that strange bearded helm, but she heard his startled gasp all the same. Lady Ranni. She lifted her chin. Indeed, 'tis a pleasure to see thee again. You died. His words were a rasp. His gaze swept past her. Blade and Lord Rykard, as I live and breathe, is this some waking dream? Her brother looked away with a growl. I wish it were. Send the other combatants away, old friend. She laid a hand on his arm. We are not here to slay my brother, but save him, and thus have no use of them. He seemed pensive, and so she hastened to amend her words for his sake. Distract them or some such. I care not, but they cannot join us on the field. They will seek to kill him. She could feel his unease. Begging your pardon, lady, but that's easier said than done. How do you intend to perform such a feat? Naruto, having held his tongue till this moment, stepped forward. He was smiling. It wasn't a nice smile. Watch and learn. They found Radahn in short order. Naruto heard the roar across the dunes long before he saw the general. A wave of wrathful sorrow, mingled with suffering. It struck him with more force than the scream ever could, and for a moment, he froze. Seeing was, as they say, believing. He knew Ranni's brother was rotting, dying from the inside out, but to actually sense it. His agony fouled the very air. Radahn had long since lost the ability to reason, but he could almost hear the words forming in his mind. Let me die. Let me die. Let him die. Brother. He cut the link and looked to Ranni, found her quivering where she stood. Hey. He laid a hand on her shoulder. It'll be all right. She gave him a long, lingering look. We shall see. Ranni yanked him backward. But in what state of mind is he? That remains to be seen. Naruto exhaled. It was a short, sharp thing to muster his resolve. That really is your brother, huh? Blade levered himself up, growling a little as he shouldered his greatsword. Used to be. His mind's long gone now. You sure this'll work? Yeah, but it's gonna be a pain. He hopped down off the dunes, heels skidding against the sand as he raced the rest of the way. Come on then, better get to him before he gets to Uswoa. An arrow whistled their way. Rykard slapped it aside with an open palm. Radahn didn't take kindly to that. A mighty shout boomed across the dunes as he strung yet more arrows to his bow. He took aim at the sky and let them loose. Then another volley. Another now. Still another. Naruto looked up, realized his intent a moment later. Scatter. Ranni went right. Rykard and Blade left. Radahn had lost none of his strength. That much became glaringly apparent when the big brute surged forward to backhand Blade across the dunes. Rykard ducked a similar sweep, golden sword singing out with unholy flame. He made the mistake of parrying and was flung away like a straw doll. That was all he had time to see. Then the general was upon him and he was too busy trying to survive. Black greatsword swept for his head. He swayed backward, left, right, center, timed his moment and there. Dropping low to the ground, he immediately kicked back up and slammed a fist into Radahn's torso with half his strength. The general grunted, even flinch. Maddened golden eyes locked onto him. A low growl peeled back pale lips, exposing teeth twisted by the scarlet rot. Fetid breath blasted him in the face, and he felt his gorge rise. Kurama winced. He shouldn't have did that. Radahn didn't move. Movement implied motion. He absolutely blurred, splashed through the air. Golden arms intercepted the swords, crisscrossed before his face. Red eyes squinted out over them. Radahn scowled at him, maddened mind not comprehending. He pushed down, bringing his full weight to bear upon him as best he could. Naruto shifted his stance, grabbed his blades and pushed back, forcing a stalemate. And still Radahn strained against him. A cold spell struck Radahn in the face. His head snapped up with a snarl. Ranni raised a hand behind him. Her voice rose over the wailing dunes. "I would have thee cease, brother of mine." Radahn paused. He heaved himself upright, sniffed, shuffled past him to inspect this strange new threat. Suddenly all his plans and schemes seemed inconsequential in the face of something this big. Bastard was quicker than he looked, faster than he'd any right to be. Naruto let him go with a grimace, eyeing the man's vast bulk. "Ranni, I changed my mind, this is a bad idea." She didn't look at him. "Be assured, I have this well in hand." The giant loomed over her with a low, questioning rumble. He hoped it was just that. "Do you not recognize me, brother?" She stood firm in his shadow. "Knowest thou not my voice?" Her poor brother leaned in closer, sniffed once, like some sort of overgrown dog. Ranni touched a hand to his forehead and whispered something. "Come," she cooed. "Remember." He didn't hear the rest. Whatever it was, it made Radahn recoil. Naruto lurched with dread in his heart. "Don't." She was just too close. A giant sword slammed into Ranni's body. She didn't even have time to cry out. One moment she stood only a stone's throw away, and the next an awful crack filled the air as she was cleaved in twine. One of her forearms sailed through the air to land at his feet. She crashed down to the dune sea, the separate halves of her body flying away from one another. "Move, you dolt." His mind rebooted a moment later. If she'd had a flesh and body, if she'd given in to his cajolance, would have died in an instant. As things stood, he could hear her colorful cursing across the dunes. She was alive if her now. Could she survive in such a state, and if so, for how long? Radahn bounded after her. Naruto's world went 6 shades of red. His body furred, intercepting him. "That's your sister, damn it." A racing unsheathed itself in the madman's, bowling him over. Deprived of its master, Radahn's horse fell with a startled whinny, bounced once, and slumped to the ground in sore need of a rest. He scarcely noticed at all. He was already moving, bounding past the beast of burden, his world fixed to a singular point. He roared at the crazed shell of a man and jumped on him. Those giant swords came up. He slapped them down. A fist struck his face, snapping his head to the side. He punched back, forcing him to the ground. "Calm down, do you hear me?" he snarled, perching himself on his. "I'm talking about Ranni, your sister." Radahn headbutted him for it, and he returned the favor, all but ying the Goliath's nose and stunning him. "Remember, damn it, just stop holding back, the stars do it for her." Radahn went still as stone, all fight leaving his body as he sprawled on the dunes. He barely even breathed. Naruto winced. He'd take it after that flurry of blows. Say what you would, but demigods hit hard. "Ranni, yes, there we go." He blew out a sigh, relieved at his victory. "Now let's just talk about this. I'll have you fixed up in a jiffy." Arian and I. A sudden surge of gravity magic ripped Naruto into the air, depriving him of all balance. He was still airborne when a falling star smote him from the night sky and drilled him into the ruined land. "Bugger." Blade winced from where he lay. "He's definitely dead this time. There's just no way he could." A trembling fist arose from the crater, bearing a middle-fingered salute. "Radahn absolutus anuva." "Survive." Naruto dragged himself out, spitting sparks. "That does it no more, Mr. Nice Guy, you're going down. Well, phase is a most unpleasant awakening." Ranni creaked an eye open with a soft groan, gazing blearily at the scarlet sky of Caelid. Raised a hand now, frowned at it as she beheld her missing fingers. She'd actually blacked out for a moment. That should not have been possible. Her body was not of flesh here, spirit merely clung to this doll's body. There was nothing to knock out as at Tiwir. Yet here she lay. She tried to move, failed. Memories came rushing back. To think that Radahn would cleave her in two. Had her beloved brother truly taken leave of his senses, it stung, knowing that her own kin cut her down without pause. She knew it was not his fault, fallen far, yes, but he'd not asked for this. He hadn't wanted this. Nay, she knew his maddened state was Malenia's work. Her spiteful sister, so determined to win, they were even now paying for her sin. Blast it all, she could still hear combat over the dunes. Ranni tried to drag herself upright. Faltered, failed, as she finally beheld the damage done to her body. She sought to sit up regardless, desperate to assess the ruined state of herself and already dreading what she would find. Oh dear, her puppet form lay broken and shattered across the sands of Caelid, cleaved clean in half, crumbling even now. Had she been of flesh, and she would surely be long dead. She owed her survival to her soul, though Radahn had cut that, too. That she still lived was a miracle and of itself. A fresh pang of dizziness assaulted her. She shook it off and muttered a cantrip under her breath. All for naught. She couldn't cling to this broken body. The binding spells she'd wounded were undone. She could feel herself slipping, barely able to cling to this ruined shell. If she lost hold of it completely, she'd bind her spirit to the small doll in Naruto's possession. If she could just reach him, such would require touching it, however, and her consort was busy fighting for her life. Another explosion rocked the sands. Radahn's great bulk hurtled past her, trading blows with Naruto and Rykard. Of poor Blade, she saw no sign. They were themselves holding back, trying to hobble him, not kill. But he just wouldn't stay still. Naruto took a punch square to the face and grinned. Rykard stabbed his blade down, pinning the limb to the floor, giving her consort an opening. The blonde swung a clenched fist upward in recompense. Ranni glimpsed a golden something, a needle perhaps clutched in his grasp, a shard of light gleaming in the ruddy red sky for all of an instant. Naruto hit him a moment later. His blow punched through her brother's armor with a hollow clang. Radahn convulsed, brought to a half for a moment. But only a moment. Then he rounded on Naruto, ignoring the thin wound even now gleaming in his gray flesh. Ranni realized his mistake before he did. Radahn's blade swept up. Move. Rykard shouldered her consort aside, slamming him out of harm's way. He paid dearly for it and hurtled away in a shower of. His sacrifice was not in vain. Naruto vaulted up, grabbed a great fistful of Radahn's hair, using it as leverage to haul him down. The general's mouth opened for another defiant roar, to which her beloved retaliated by shoving a fistful of preserving boluses into his mouth. Her brother gagged, tried to spit them out, only for the blonde to cram more down his throat, thereby forcing him to swallow or choke and die. That's right, Naruto grinned at him. Eat up. Ranni dragged herself up over a dune as they continued to wrestle with one another. Here at last she saw Blade. Her shadow limped her way, clutching his ribs, armor horribly dented. She saw his eyes widen in concern when he beheld the ruined state of her body and soul. Mercifully, he made no comment on either. Radahn wailed angrily. Blade made a noise of pity, echoing her thoughts. Aye, those taste foul. Naruto had naught but deaf ears for the general's complaints. Golden palms laid themselves to rest upon Radahn's. As she looked on, her brother's ruined legs the stumps of his ankles began to mend and grow anew before her very eyes. Evidently that needle had done something, and the boluses he'd shoved down his throat had aided in some small manner. It wasn't enough. A vicious backhand blasted Naruto away, medicine and all, sending him skipping across the dunes. Enough. Ranni saw Rykard climb to his feet not a yard away, bleeding from a deep tear in his. Despite his mortal wound, he still stood, and the reason became apparent. His eyes, gold as always, but larger somehow, a hallmark of the monster he'd once been. He stabbed his blade into a half-dead corpse and his wounds began to close. Another stab, and he stood straighter. By the third, he regained some semblance of his strength. Enough to speak again. You always were the best of us, brother. A low, throaty laugh shook his shoulders. However, he swept his sword to the side, its golden blade scoured clean of the filth that once consumed it. Flames ate across its seething edge, burning down into the sand. You have forgotten yourself, and now you are far from what you once were. Radahn rounded on him with a roar. Rykard's sword flashed out and a pillar of fire consumed their sibling. He pitched back with a shriek. And in doing so, you have broken your oath. Rykard parried with a fencer's grace and drove clenched knuckles into his face. Done the one thing you swore never to do. In the same instant he slashed the air and conjured spellfire to burn him, melting the armor encasing his. Harmed our sister. A pale hand flashed out, stabbing in her direction. Look upon her and see what you have wrought. Mad though he was, Radahn complied with this absurd demand. He looked at her, saw her, flinched like a naughty dog. Ranni. Rykard struck like a snake. A savage kick wrapped their brother's face and sent him hurtling across the dunes. Allow me to remind you, dear brother, why you feared me. He slammed his blade down and fire burst forth with a blasphemous retort, wild red snakes of furious flame lashing out to coil around Radahn's limbs. As when they dragged the giant demigod to the ground, lashing him to the crumbling soil. Radahn went berserk. Now, boy, Rykard bellowed, do it now, I can't hold him. Naruto exploded out of the sand, shining brighter than the tree itself. Her went left, Rykard right, and the tide turned. The tide was turning. Naruto knew it. Rykard did, too. They all did. Make no mistake, Radahn fought hard. He made them work for every inch, every step. A song of fire. The great general broke free more than once, pushed their patience and their bodies to the very limit, but he was faltering. Without loyal Leonard to carry him forth into battle, he could no longer move as he once had. Bleeding from more than a dozen wounds as he was, the greatest of the demigods gradually began to weaken under their assault. He raged as only a warrior could, refusing to go quietly into that good night. And then he leaped. Naruto didn't expect it, not at first. One moment Rykard had his brother bound and they were closing in to finish what they'd started. Then quite suddenly, they weren't, and he found himself squinting into a sharp haze of stinging sand as Radahn hurtled into the clouds. Someone that big shouldn't be able to jump like that. Above, he looked up some more. Something fell from the sky. No, someone was rapidly growing larger. A flaming trail of death hurtled down from the upper atmosphere. Rykard saw it, swore, and flung himself aside. Naruto's first instinct was to do the same. He looked back a second later, scowled. Ranni was behind him, and Blade with her, both terribly wounded. If he tried to dodge, no charge right through them. They'd be killed. Rykard must have realized it too, because he flung up a barrier of coiled serpents to shield them. They both knew it wouldn't be enough. Not against someone like Radahn. A bead of sweat ran down his brow. Are you prepared? More or less. Let's give this one last go, shall we? He planted his feet. Spread his arms. Here goes nothing. This is my last resort. Gold light blazed up his body, burning brighter than ever before. Radahn. He raised his gaze and called out to the falling meteor. There's only one way this ends. Was it his imagination, or did the falling star change course just now? No, it was definitely curving toward him. That's right, Samir, hit me if you dare. Naruto, you fool, he heard Ranni rage at him. Move. Nope. Radahn crashed into him like a falling star. In another lifetime, another world, he'd nearly died from such. This time he was ready. His boots bit into the dunes and his back shrieked at him for his foolishness, but his legs held. A thin line of ran down his nose. It did nothing to hide his wild grin. Radahn made a noise of confusion because now it was his turn to look up. Up again, up even more. Kurama grinned down at him in all his golden glory, holding him at bay with a giant palm. Sorry, big guy. Game over. A massive claw swung down with impossible speed. Radahn punched up to meet it. No dice. Kurama flattened him to the sands. I told you. Now hold still. Naruto hopped down and planted a boot on his head. And let me fix your everything. A single punch laid Radahn out once and for all, leaving him a stunned wreck on the sands. High above, the stars began to shift. Naruto never saw them. Why would he? The moment Radahn went down, he grabbed him by the head. And in he went. The stars were falling. Radahn could feel them slipping through his grasp. He couldn't hold them. Here at last he'd become too weak. One by one they streaked across the sky, hurtling to their ultimate destination. He could no sooner stop them than he could catch the wind in his hands. With each passing moment his failure grew more pronounced, his heart heavier. He lay there in the dark, unable to see, unable to move, yet somehow able to think. Why? Radahn had an inkling. That strange needle thrust through his ribs, it touched a tiny piece of his mind that he'd sealed away, a fragment before Malenia's awful poison took him. Those awful boluses buoyed it, granting him a measure of coherent thought for the first time in an age. Even now the rot buzzed at him, trying to reclaim him, yet unable to. Something held it back. Something was healing him, mending him, regrowing ruined organs, fishing him forth from the scarlet rot as one might a fish out the lake. He couldn't even fight that, so weak was he. What did it matter if his mind remained or his body somehow was regained? He'd failed. Just as he'd failed his family, his men, Kaled, the Golden Order, himself. For all his might, he wasn't strong enough to do what needed to be done. Not when it mattered most. His failure first began with father, unable to make him stay with mother. The first mistake of many. Everything had spiraled downward from there, one error compounding another. He'd then failed to turn the two fingers' gaze from Ranni. Perhaps, had he done so, he could have prevented the horrors that followed. But he hadn't, had he likewise. He'd failed to see his sister's schemes until it was too late. His blindness led to the death of Godwin during the Night of the Black Knives. Mighty though he was, he could not contain the chaos that followed the shattering. He'd failed to take Landel from Morgott and in doing so, restore peace. He had failed Rykard, and so his brother became a monster that turned against him. Defeat after defeat, setback after setback. Then, at the end, he'd failed to finish Malenia quickly. His honor had been his undoing. And in doing so, he'd unleashed the rot, dooming both Kaled and his men. He'd failed poor Leonard too, his truest friend left to rot with him throughout the ages. The Scarlet Bloom mocked him even now. Failure, failure, failure. Yes, Radahn the failure. It had a miserable ring to it. He didn't fail. Something glowed in the void, a light in the dark, searing through the shadows shackling him. Radahn raised his head to greet it, lethargic in his despondency. You did everything you could, didn't you? Faint footsteps reached his ears, each one burning away the black miasma. No one could have asked for more. Who dared enter his mind a stranger? No, he knew this one. It was the Golden Warrior from before. He'd heard his name shouted across the dunes, screamed on his sister's lips. Naruto. Strong steps carried him forth, but rather than finish him, the blonde specter sat beside him. He made no move to attack. Radahn almost wished he would. Death would be preferable to living with the shame of his sins, his very failure a shackle around his neck. How do you feel? The whiskered warrior plonked down at his side, giving him an idle look. Come on now, say something. A hand slapped his shoulder. I burned up a lot of chakra to drag you back. The least you can do is be a good host and answer me. Radahn rasped out a gasp. Like death warmed over. Let me die. I can't do that. The blonde being before him shook his head. They're waiting for you. Rennala, Rykard, even Ranni. You might sleep for a while after this, but you definitely won't die. Ranni. He'd seen what he did. Radahn remembered. I harmed her. Rykard, too. You weren't in your right mind, and she looks kinda different right now. I'm sure she didn't mean to upset you. As for Rykard, well, a rueful smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He's a cranky old bastard, but I think he'll forgive you. And mother, she's getting better. His words didn't carry even the thinnest shroud of deceit. I'm sure she'll be happy to see you again. Why do this? He glowered down at him. Why help me? What do you want? I want it all. Naruto spread his arms wide, encompassing all before them, and with those words, the sun rose in the dark. I want to give everyone a happy ending. He stood against it, so bright that Radahn found he had to look away, such was his brilliance. Don't worry about what you did. That wasn't you. I'll take responsibility for it. I'll devour your sins. A merry smile shone through the light. Every last one of them. And when I find Malenia, the one who made you this mess. He slapped an open fist into his palm. I'm gonna spank her. It's the least she deserves, I think. It was too good to be true. Such a being should not exist. And yet he did. Such a stubborn, golden soul such as this. Radahn chuckled at the last, a weak, hoarse sound. A single tear rolled down his scarred face. Noble warrior, who truly art a greedy one. Let there be light. He'd done it. Ranni watched Naruto stumble away from Radahn's body on weak legs. Not a corpse. Body. Her brother slumbered peacefully on his back, sprawled against the dunes. Leonard lay only a few yards away, enjoying a well-deserved rest. But her consort looked most concerned for her. She must look an awful sight, her body broken, soul nearly cleaved in two. Ranni, he thrust her miniature doll at her. Here, my thanks. She reached for the doll in his grasp. It was smaller, and wounded as her soul was, she would have to squeeze, shed parts of herself, compact down into it. Weakened as she was, she might even lose a great deal offo. She paused, a pang of dread overtaking her. No, she couldn't. She wouldn't. She mustn't. Trembling fingers pushed the little thing away. Naruto cried out and tried to shove it back, but she wouldn't have it. Her spirit was fracturing to be sure, but if she cut off a piece of herself and thrust it into that doll. Ranni felt a pang of dread for the first time in an age. Take it away. Ranni, come on. The anguish in his voice hurt her more than any word ever could. What are you doing? No, she tried to lean back, but that just had her falling out Blade's arms. I won't. It wouldn't just be her power that she might lose. It would be her memories. If there was even a chance, however small, she would not take it. To live a life without memory was akin to death for her. She would be killing the Ranni that knew Naruto. There could be no crueler fate, but the alternative meant death or return to the Erd Tree. That too might well destroy her. They had no means by which to return home quickly. None of them were truly tarnished after all. They were not touched by grace, nor could they use it to move about the lands between. Nowhere to run, nowhere to go. Her soul crumbled with each passing moment. Think of something. Anything. Wasn't there another way? Hadn't Naruto said something earlier? She was sure he had. Buto got the pain, but it's so hard to think. She touched a trembling hand to his. I'm sorry. A startled look flashed across Naruto's face. Rykard, Plan C. Plan C. She tried to marshal her thoughts, but everything was so fuzzy. Whatever is he on about? Her brother responded instantly, drew forth a gleaming metal of purest blue from his ruined robes and slammed it down upon the sand. The world began to blur away in motes of blue light. At first she thought it was her dimming vision, but no, the world was changing around them and Radahn, shifting into. What sorcery was this? They were back at Raya Lucaria. But how had Mother given them some manner of trinket? Did she foresee this? Move aside, move aside. Ranni pushed past them, saw Radahn, bleeding all over the library floor, rushed forward. Oh, my dear boy, you are all right? I'm here. She fed a look to Naruto. Does he live? Naruto snapped something at her and stabbed a finger Mother's way. He spoke quickly. Ranni looked pensive, but granted him a nod and reluctantly moved away from Radahn's prone form. Ranni couldn't hear it over the sudden ringing in her ears. Blade set her down. Mother leaned over her. Are you sure? Of what being helped? She didn't understand. She lifted her chin to look up at him. Yes, what had she just agreed to? Ranni squealed and leaned down to embrace her battered, broken body with her severed soul. My little girl, I'm so proud. Ranni couldn't blush in her current form, but she could squirm in embarrassment. Mother, Rykard scoffed. See, now you know how it feels. She must have blacked out again somewhere in the interim because she suddenly found herself staring up at the ceiling. There was no sign of either of them. Someone had propped her up under something. Even then, she could barely see. A hand waved before her face. Eyes up, lass. She squinted, trying to focus on it, put a name on the face. Jiren. The old eccentric pulled her upright. It's all right. We have you. Won't be but a moment. Naruto was suddenly there beside him. He wore a strained smile. Sorry, but we're doing this here. Doing what? Harg. She trailed off in a gasp as another pang rocked her fractured soul. What is this? Where am I? What are you doing? Radahn's right-hand man frowned. She's delirious. Best get to it, lad. I can't keep her soul tethered for long. Naruto held up his arms. His left hand pulsed with scarlet flame, whilst embers of azure danced in his right. Ah, she remembered now. Those words he'd said to her so long ago. Want a new body? Ah, yes, that. Creation of all things. Remember, his voice tugged her forth fro the past. I can't do this by myself. I need you to help me. He held his hands over her, eyes glowing in the gloom. Visualize the form you want to have. I might screw something up if I do it alone. Fuzzy thoughts pushed to the forefront of Ranni's mind. She knew what to do. Right, stay awake. Don't drift off. Mustn't let the Erd Tree claim her. Ranni closed her eye for but a moment to focus. With it, her thoughts began to clear. It felt like the work of an eternity, ants of ice crawling under her skin. She did not desire her old form, the flesh of an Empyrean, slave to the whims of the two fingers. She'd taken the likeness of her mentor long ago for her puppet body. She would do the same with this one. Would not be the same, of course, but different. Crafted to perfection, this new form, not yet a true goddess, would nevertheless be every bit deserving of a demigod. And then at last she would wait. What was that? Ranni gasped at the sudden surge of sensation. Moonlight blue light filled her vision. Two halves were made whole. Her world blurred. She was born anew. Moonlight blue eyes opened with a start. Because you see, Ranni felt it. Everything. Pale light shimmered over her skin as she lay sprawled out in her bed. She raised one of her hands, felt the faint chill of the cold air in her chambers, her fingers flexing when she willed it. No longer were they the numb instrument of her will, but flesh, and once more. Was this how it felt to have flesh? She'd long since forgotten the sensation. It tingled. A pleased smile graced her pale features. She touched a hand to her face, felt it. 4 palms flitted across her body, inspecting herself further. Everything seemed to be in place, perhaps a bit better endowed than she remembered, but still so short. To be fair, she'd gained at least an inch in terms of height, but in comparison to her former Empyrean flesh, she was woefully lacking. Naruto was yet taller than her, something he'd no doubt tease her about once she tracked him down. Still, this was the form her subconscious had chosen. Her once flaming red locks were well and truly lost to her for good now, her gleaming golden eyes a thing of the past. She had divested herself of them in their entirety, chosen to remain in the guise of her mentor rather than regain that which she once lost. And now, once again, she could feel. She was not complete, not a goddess true, not yet, but she couldn't keep herself from smiling. Smiling softly to herself, rose from her bed and padded across the room toward the mirror beyond. The floor was deliciously cold beneath her bare feet. She reveled in the sensation, shedding her heavy robes and hat as she went. She found herself shivering a little despite it all. Even so, she admired herself in the mirror. Her right eye was still sealed for now. A small price to pay, she supposed. Her hair was smooth, her skin supple, her power intact. On her terms, not those of the wretched two fingers. It felt like coming home from a long journey. But where was Naruto? She had hoped to wake and find him here. Yet he was gone, vanished without so much as a trace. It baffled her, angered her, infuriated her in equal measure. Where was he? She wanted to hunt him down and pin him to a wall. With a huff, she reached down, drawing her robes around her bare body. Where the devil did he run off to this time? Come to pay an old smith a visit, have you? Naruto hummed a response as he plunked down beside Eiji. More or less, the old troll didn't begrudge him that his helmed head remained firmly focused on the task at hand. How someone so large could make human-sized tools he knew not, but Eiji did it masterfully. They might not be the sharpest blades, or even the fastest, but they would never falter. Even here in Raya Lucaria his skills didn't bend or break. Even for a moment he tended his forge well, relentlessly crafting blades by the dozens. Blades they would probably need in the coming days, if Rykard's words were true. War is coming, boy. Best be prepared. The old snake had sent Tanith back to Volcano Manor to rally what remained of his forces while he convalesced from his wounds. He'd not heard from him since. Ranni would be fine when she woke up. There were things he needed to discuss with him while she wasn't around. Radahn was due to wake up any day now, and once he did, things would be set into motion. No time like the present, then. How good are you with that hammer of yours? Good enough. A low, bemused rumble pierced the troll's helm. Would you like me to craft something for you? Kurama offered a rueful chuckle of his own. Finally making your move, are you? He made his request. Eiji stilled for a moment, hearing him out. Considered his words. Now, he said at length. I can do that. Did you have a certain stone in mind? Naruto offered one, hiding its color within the palm of his free hand. Eiji accepted it with surprising dexterity, turning the gem over. Nimble fingers for an old man. He didn't drop it. Not once. Gingerly he pulled out a golden box, opened it, dropped the gem within, and set it aside atop a pile of white cloth for safekeeping. Only then did he turn to face him once more. A fine color, he said at the last. I take it you've chosen the metal for the ring's band. He reached into his satchel and withdrew the chosen item. I have. Eiji saw through him. You intend to surprise Our Lady. Naruto couldn't quite hide his smile. Maybe. Very well. Give me 3 days, and it will be ready. Perfect. He bounded to his feet. I'm thinking about heading to Nokron with Blade in the meantime. Do you? Now the smith's hammer stilled on the anvil. While Lady Ranni slumbers, I would not recommend it. His brow furrowed, not quite comprehending. Why? She will be cross with you. I know. But I wanted to save her the trouble. Off how Eiji's hammer descended, swatting the back of his head. He yelped in surprise, not pain. What was that for? For being foolish. Eiji returned to his smithing, but there could be no mistaking the bite behind his words. You've come far, but you mustn't charge ahead now. Make no mistake, once you find the finger-slaying blade, there can be no going back. Lady Ranni loves you. She may be loath to admit it at times, but if harm were to befall you, she would be heartbroken. Nor will the two fingers will not tolerate any further heresy from you. Easy for him to say. Then why have they ignored us so far? Have they that great helm tilted toward him? Consider this from their point of view. As far as they care concerned, we've gathered 3 great runes here in the academy. A fine prize for a bold tarnished. I would not be surprised if one made the attempt. Naruto felt his eyes flash red. They'll regret it. That they would, but as you well know, death means precious little in this lance without the right tool. As a shiver shook his wizened frame. And there are worse things than death. Much worse. He touched one hand to his helmet, voice gone haunted behind his mirror helm. I dare not remove this for fear that very thing of them finding me. One of their agents is already among us, though he knows it not. Silence stretched between them. He gave voice to it. You're talking about Blade, aren't you? You already suspect, then. Good. Eiji's wizened helm bobbed in acknowledgement. That saves me the trouble of a lengthy explanation. Blade was created by the 2 fingers as a shackle of sort for Lady Ranni. When she rebels, when she seeks out the fingers to slay them, he will turn on her. On us. On you. A rare ember of anger sparked in him. He won't. We both know he's better than that. He may wish to be, but he cannot stop his destiny. Blade was his friend, damn it. They'd fought together, shed together, even drank together. The idea of that stubborn old wolf turning on them, any of them, proved utterly unfathomable for him. He planted his feet, crossed both arms over his armored, and shook his head. We make our own destiny, Eiji. I thought you knew that. His has already begun to unravel, which is why I have made preparations. Realization dawned, ugly and appalling. Is that why I haven't seen him for the last 2 days? I cannot tell you. Too bad. He would. Now just hear me out, Eiji. There's no need to lock Blade away. I've got an idea. Do you? Now he felt a fur of concern stir in the old troll's withered. His mirror helm tilted toward him. Tell me. Ranni entered the library. Swift footsteps carried her past Mother. She knelt before them. Even then could feel Renala's gaze searing into her back. Her quiet curiosity, fumbling fingers flailed at the lock, turned the key, eased it open with nary a creak of well-oiled hinges. Sure enough, her ring awaited her within. She stared at it, wavered. Did she dare with her ring and this oath she could begin her ascension? Could she? But the idea of simply slaying the 2 fingers and leaving him behind that hurt even more. Was she considering this? She was. The realization humbled her. Once she would have scoffed at such, but now they'd been through so much together it felt like only yesterday he'd first stumbled upon her tower. Chaos had come in his wake to be sure, but it was that very chaos that had propelled her to where she was now. Since then, her life had come full circle. Now all that remained was Nokron and the ascension to follow if one were to ignore Naruto's feelings toward her imminent departure. That was an argument forestalled for now, but not forsaken. They would come back to it one day and soon. They must, before things came to a head. But before that, she must face the rest of her kin and her sins. Did she regret what had befallen Godwin? Yes, immeasurably. She could have persuaded the Black Knives to seek anyone else, yet she'd encouraged them to seek Marika's firstborn instead. Because in her heart of hearts, she could not bear the idea of sacrificing Radahn or Rykard on the altar of her ambition. Weakness on her part, and was it wrong to want freedom? She'd seen what the Greater Will had done to Father. It had taken him, broken him, left him a shell of what he once was. He who had once bounced her on his knee as he told her grand stories and bedtimes. He who had bandaged her every SC and bruise. He who held her close when her first falcon died, rendered a mere pawn by the fingers. She would not become that. She would never become that. She was no one's puppet. The Black Knives would need to be dealt with as well. Their goals had aligned for a time, but no longer. They would surely object to her scheme. Their journey was nearing its end, but there were still loose ends to prune before her ascension. The Omen brothers, Morgott and Mohg, yet remained, as did the twin prodigies Miquella and Melania. Godwin's remains must be laid to rest in the depths. She'd not seen it, but she'd heard terrible things. It was a task she dreaded, an undertaking she hoped to leave for last. There were strange rumors in the south as well. Whispers of a great army abounded of a force that sacked Lingrave and that put Godric to the torch. Some said it was led by great Godfrey himself. Nonsense, of course. He had been hounded from the lands between long ago. Why return now did he too seek the Elden Ring? Just thinking of it all made her head spin. Still so much to attend to, and yet for all her schemes there had been no reprisal save the curious absence of Celavis. Something was afoot there. It felt as though she were waiting for the other shoe to drop. It surely would soon. She had regained her flesh early, yes, but her ascension was not yet complete. For all her power she was not yet a goddess true. The fingers would strike at her soon. They must. If they didn't, they would risk certain doom. She would be ready. They would not find her wanting. Blast it all. She hissed at herself. You've come this far. Don't hesitate. She grabbed the ring. It was cool in her fist, and maybe she could just keep it on her. For safekeeping, yes. She needn't say a thing. You've chosen him, haven't you? Blast it all. She'd forgotten about Mother. She was still watching. Was her madness an act? Even now she locked in, stood stiffly, refusing to look, refusing to give her the satisfaction. Mother could prove nothing of what she'd done. Who would believe her? No one, certainly. I wonder what your children shall look like. Oh, gods. Ranni felt her face begin to burn. There was only one recourse. She fled in a rout. Renala's laughter hounded her all the way out the library. Hey, Ranni. Naruto found her. Or perhaps she found him. In the end, it didn't matter at all. Ranni rounded the corner, and quite suddenly, there he was, too close to dodge. Blue eyes bulged. Her own widened. Unable to stop herself in time, she smacked right into his and bounced off. He caught her. Of course she had just enough time to conceal her ring in one of her many hands before he drew her close. What's that you got there? Her emotions, thinly leashed, sparked anew. She stabbed a finger at him, drilling her finger into his. You, me, yo. She stalked forward with a snarl, all but grabbing him by the arm. Come with me now. Naruto didn't protest when she dragged him to her chambers. He only laughed. Damn him. Damn her bleeding heart. In the days that had followed Ranni's awakening to her new body, a slew of seemingly innocuous occurrences were witnessed within the halls of Rhea Lucaria, their nature ranging from innocuously banal to outright bizarre. Old Mungerman more than once felt the desire to vacate his post in front of the library to observe just what it was that put this feeling of childlike amusement in the air. The distant rustling of cloth and patter of bare feet on the hard floor was more often than not accompanied by sharp intakes of breath and snorts of laughter from an unseen but familiar-sounding blonde. Stretching once in his aged but perfectly maintained armor, the Carian knight again heard a series of doors distantly opening and shutting. One couldn't help but wonder just what Princess Ranni and her outlander of a consort were up to. He gained his answer a moment later. Whump! Blasted to hell! Ranni's voice echoed through the halls, sucking air in through her teeth. Whoa, you okay there? Naruto replied soon after, voice sharp with concern but a note of relaxation that spoke of having the situation in hand. Did you stub your toe again? Ranni's growl boomed off the halls in response, so much more vivid than the echoey voice of the doll that she had inhabited until quite recently. Be silent, mine consort, to speak of such wayward clumsiness as pornatured slander amidst those who are courting a beat passed between them. Naruto's steadily growing grin filling Ranni's visage, leaning enlarged to her twinkling blue eyes. His own eyes dipped to the floor, her right foot poking from beneath the hem of her white dress, with its big toe throbbing redly. "It's just I stubbed your toe again," Naruto drawled, dragging out the word in amusement as she slipped his hands behind his head. "Have you no more brain than stone? The sensations of this body after so long are alien to me, new yet remembered, abject in their idiosyncrasies compared to decades off. You cease that infernal grinning," she called, thumping a pair of clasped hands into the blonde's shoulder as he chuckled. As it turned out, being away from her flesh for so long meant that a seamless reintegration to walking through the waking world for while fine motor control was something to which she was attuned as a witch. Unforeseen nuance had presented an interesting learning curve. It was not to say that Naruto had not done a superb job in crafting her new body, though predominantly because she had guided his efforts, she internally preened. Everything was there as she had mentally directed it. Her forearms, slim waist, and modest bust was rendered with alabaster skin as white as the moon she was the princess of. Every follicle of hair and capillary of her cardiovascular system was as it should be, adjusted to her 2 additional limbs seamlessly so as to not run into some unforeseen circumstances like her heart not being able to provide for 2 extra limbs. The issue, as it turned out, was acclimatizing to sensation again. Sensation in her puppet had been a cornucopia of vagaries and loosely defined ennui at best and at worst, something that couldn't be put into the common tongue without giving the receiver an aneurysm. Naruto must have seen her pensive expression, for he waved her on. "In my prior vessel," she grimaced as she stubbed her toe again. "Sensation was subjective. When not paying attention, it simply felt to my soul as a collapsing sphere. I could tell pressure, but the precise nature of haptic, olfactory, and visual was quite lost on me." He still regarded her silently, letting the princess explain her perspective on the matter with understanding eyes, having long come to his own conclusion on the problem. "She's been so starved for sensation for decades that adjusting to having it back is fun to the point of being distracting," he thought, remembering the plethora of things they'd done together to wait out the days while Radahn slept through his recovery. She had walked every single type of flooring that Raya Lucaria had to offer, from cool flagstones to warm, fuzzy carpets and even the muddy, waterlogged grounds. Much as she had tried to hide her childlike wonder at relearning haptic feedback behind her ever-present ladylike demeanor, her new face was far more expressive. Seeing her standing there under the cool light of the moon, smiling innocently at the feeling of wet grass under bare feet, her white dress fluttering in an errant night breeze, Naruto felt butterflies thunder from his stomach to his. She looked the same, but the small changes made Ranni so much more of a beautiful creature to observe. The light rise and fall of her, taking actual breaths, the small jump of the vein in her neck with each pulse, and the more authentic feeling of life radiating from her body felt nice against his sage senses. Before, she had simply existed, a singularity in space and time, a frozen moment rendered porcelain. Now Ranni the witch lived, and he could not help but fall in love all over again. Shaking his head to rid it of the pink-tinted thoughts that his furry tenant would doubtless rib him for, Naruto decided to make a suggestion to Ranni, who even now was looking to break into stride once again. "If it keeps happening, maybe ask Eiji to make you some new shoes. Or if you can't wait that long, maybe we could do something to get you a better hang of your body before you put it through its paces." Ranni hummed in thought, striking up a thinking pose with one hand on her chin, the other bracing its elbow, and the other 2 crossed under her bust. Snowy brows knitting together, her mind alighted on an idea before a full-body blush rose up from the tips of her toes to her hairline. We can't do that just yet. To ask is most salacious indeed." The blonde brow rose in mild consternation. "I meant like going for a run or something. What are you even?" Her blush tripled when Naruto didn't catch her meaning. "Not a jot more from your vulpine maw." Ranni pushed a finger against Naruto's mouth to shush him, beating the internal voice squealing at his lips' softness against her finger into submission. Schooling her features, the only daughter of Caria came upon another idea. "Well, there is this one thing, but it has been many decades. Then again, so is everything for me." Tilting his head, Naruto wordlessly gave his assent to whatever the young woman chose and fell into step behind her as she led them through the labyrinthine halls of the academy to her new destination. As they walked, many scholars and sorcerers adorned in variations of the academy's uniform and helmet gave the pair a respectful berth, inclining heads and offering bows or curtsies to their princess and her right hand. Yet another odd change in the past days. After returning to the academy with Radahn's unconscious body in tow, a marked change had overtaken the academy. From the expansive lakes surrounding Liurnia, many long-lost stewards and knights that had once served the royal family prior to the shattering had emerged from the mists and renewed their vows of fealty. So too had the scholars, who had until recently shown Rennala and her brood nothing but scorn, entered a respectful, if intimidated, subservience to them. Each set about refurbishing the academy to its proper status as a magical fortress, until quite suddenly it was just that a bastion against the madness of the world. "Doesn't matter to me, just so long as they don't turn their swords our way, not a jot. Mimicking Ranni now, are we?" "Bah, hush up." The supreme confidence with which these words were thought and soon proved a memory of the past when 20 minutes later, Naruto stood in front of Ranni in an abandoned but otherwise cleaned lecture hall, its lecterns and desks shunted to the edge of the room. "You want to do what?" Ranni smirked unabashedly. Despite being barefoot, she felt vindicated that the boot was on the other foot, metaphorically speaking. "Thou and I are going to waltz," she said, making no effort to hide how amused the thought made her. "Is it a problem?" His eyebrows shot to his hairline, his face unbelieving. "Waltz, I can barely jump up and down in time to the music when drunk. There's no way I can do some fancy high society dance." "You can, you will, and in fact you already promised to," Ranni replied with a calm cadence. She snapped her fingers with a glitter of mana, and all at once, a dozen gramophones placed along the walls sprang to life, their crenulated horns producing a warm, lilting tune that even in its opening bars was heavy on brass. More to the point, "Thou hast a truly wondrous reason to attend." Ranni approached the taller blonde and squared her posture, her upper arms grasping Naruto's form in a traditional hold while the lower pair guided Naruto's to their appropriate places. "Oh, and why's that?" he asked, a dusting of pink at his cheeks. Ranni looked up at him, the music rising in resonance as her magics also worked to rid the horns of any rust. Her own cheeks flushed. "Firstly, for I am thy partner." "And the second?" Naruto asked, the pair slowly beginning to sway against one another. "Because there comes a time, dear consort of mine, when everyone, be he man or boy, must learn to dance." As the music built, so too did their movements, gyrating out in ever-growing circles in time to the three-bar-centric waltz until, with an unsaid agreement, they stepped out. It was not without its faults, for even at the best of times, 6 arms in the mix made for a hectic medley of limbs. Believe it or not, Ranni was the problem child. There was an intoxicating nature to his touch, the feeling of Naruto's corded muscles under raiment that she had designed, in her embrace and dancing in step made her mind wander. He was hers, and though their words and affection was still chaste in action, there was a karma that bound them as one cohesive unit. By hook or by crook, she was his, and he was hers, and these new feelings, these new experiences underscored things she had always secretly known. How foolish was she to deride herself so long ago for thinking their meeting was something out of a juvenile fairy tale, yet now all she wanted to do was reach out and... "Oof," Naruto grunted, eyes bugging but paling in comparison to Ranni's own. In her fervor, she had oh dear, did I squeeze his buttocks. Heat searing fire scalding alabaster flesh, her brain unable to process the information her soul sent, throwing her body into uncharacteristic shambles. One hand squeezed his while the other pulled his waist closer and squeeze. Not again. But contrary to her internal screaming, Naruto did something that she could not have expected. He found his rhythm. With a soft turn of his lips, the brash blonde stepped in to lead the dance in accordance with the music, leading them in ever-widening circles of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Ranni's mania cooled even as her face remained as red as her long-lost Empyrean hair. Her spasms came under control and she too danced, holding Naruto close as the music rose to its zenith, then slowly trailed off. Soon enough they were left standing alone in the heart of the hall, their blue eyes locked in a tender moment with neither sure what to say until Ranni drew his face towards hers, feeling his breath tickle her face, their lips so close. An awful crash shook the entire academy, sending the duo toppling atop each other in a tangle of arms. Someone squawked in the distance. "He's awake." It took Naruto a few seconds to regain his composure, but deep down he knew the moment was lost. "Radahn?" he asked, already knowing the answer. Ranni knew too, letting out a huff. "But is he sane?" There was only one way to find out. Radahn's awakening had proven bombastic, to say the least. Transporting him from Caelid to Rhea Lucaria had taken more time than any would have liked, but the prospect of housing the titanic demigod would have given any logistics chief a heart attack. In the end, it was decided to empty out an entire lecture hall on the ground floor for fear the man's sleeping bulk would destroy the stairs where Rynala and Rykard had overseen removing and disposing of his lion-themed armor. Though Naruto's power had expunged the rot, the armor was barely holding together, the man's will and subconscious gravity magic holding the pitted plates together. Not wanting to leave her firstborn son on the hard stone floor, though Naruto was sure he could sleep under a mountain with nary a complaint, Rynala had drafted the blonde and blade to make a fitting bed. A difficult task, given that the good general was some 27 feet tall. Such odds had never put the blonde Uzumaki down, so it was with his Wolfen friend that they bolted together a solution. Raiding the academy dormitories, they stole some 24 single mattresses and arranged them 6 by 4 on the lecture hall floor before surrounding the outside of the bed with straw on the off chance the slumbering giant fell out of bed. Rynala had levitated her son onto the bed and left him to sleep off Naruto's miraculous rejuvenation. He had remained like that for days, until, with the abruptness of a cannon firing, he awoke, Leonard unconsciously using gravity magic to catapult himself skywards. Sadly for Radahn, Rynala and later Ranni had foreseen such a possibility and warded the ceiling to repel physical damage, rebounding brave Radahn into his bed with an earth-shaking bang. Radahn placed large palms against his face and slowly took the time needed to clear his thoughts, oblivious to the chorus of scared screams outside the room and running feet. Everything ached, but he reflected that it was better than the rot. All at once, a torrent of memories flooded into his waking mind, driving him to close his golden eyes and plug his eyes to stem the tide. Looking up at a great king, an elden lord with a lion chuffing at his shoulder, how he wanted to be like him when he was big and strong. His parents smiled at him, pride in their eyes as he levitated his instructor in gravity magic over his head. Little Ranni and Rykard grew into power and status as he was called to lead armies of his own. Leonard, scrawny, dependable Leonard who had borne his bulk even as he put his enemies to the sword. Marika's banishment of Godfrey, father, taking his place, the tears of his mother. The night, the shattering. Melania, brother said, a voice he could never forget, so small and feminine yet full of power. Opening his eyes, Radahn took stock of his surroundings and found himself looking into the single blue gaze of his sister. He knew it to be her, though she was a far cry from the little redhead he had known, whose corpse he had seen burned atop that blasted rooftop. I like her better this way, he mused, his once granite-colored face now a much healthier tan. She was not alone. The blonde from before, who shined like the sun, stood at her elbow, a guardian sentinel with a smile on his face and warmth in his eyes. He straightened up, honor compelling him to give respect to the one who had saved him from that horrific fate. You're looking better, big guy. Naruto peered up at the giant of a demigod, assessing the progress of his still healing body. I didn't rough you up too bad, though I got to say you got a mean right hook. Pretty sure you busted my liver with that last dive, he said in jest, earning him an elbow to the stomach from Ranni. Must you bring down the mood? Naruto Ranni scolded her consort, drawing a wan smile from the blonde who kept his gaze fixed on Radahn's face. I can't not be me. There's a minimum amount of normality I can handle before I have to have a spot of fun. Plus, he did bust my liver, among several other organs. The pair broke down into a bickering routine that the eldest sibling found a joy to watch after so long in the red wastes. It was with childlike elation that he recognized this lecture hall, the same one he had first practiced gravity magic in. Rhea Lucaria, then, oh, the memories. The door swung open again, and two more figures entered, one man and one woman, his kin both. Brother, you wake? Rykard groused, his bearded face glowing with reserved excitement, a far cry from his usual austere repose. How are your injuries? Did the blonde blackguard leave anything out of plot? A feminine fist backhanded Rykard out of the way before a blue and red shape blurred towards Radahn, arms wide. My boy, Rennala shouted, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Radahn opened his eyes and accepted his mother into his embrace with a pained grunt but did not resist, recognizing his mother and the warmth that he had long since thought forgotten. Pulling himself to stand, Rykard fell into step on the other side of Ranni to look at the reunion. Naruto looked over his shoulder and saw little Raya poking her head in through the door, her starstruck face at seeing another uncle brightening the room. Ranni slowly shifted her hand, letting it find Naruto's and interlocking her fingers, seeking the comfort that he was all too willing to provide. Squeezing her hand twice, Naruto met the gaze of every family member, all with various reactions. Maternal love veiled by waning madness, ruffled annoyance being browbeaten by surprise, innocent desire, thankful assent and love. Words did not need to be said, for the feeling alone conveyed its meaning. Thank you for bringing us back together. After what seemed like an eternity of Rennala crying her happiness into Radahn's exceptionally broad, the mightiest demigod finally spoke, his voice rich yet hoarse. Firstly, I must ask, is Leonard all right? His question sent all save Naruto sputtering. He could understand the want to know your steadfast partner was okay. The brave little horse, he's fine. He followed us all the way from Caelid. He's sleeping it off in the stables, he explained, whiskered cheeks dimpled. I'm glad, for all my madness, for how far I fell, he never left me. That brave, stupid little horse of mine. Finally, the impenetrable visage cracked, a single tear rolling from his rock-hewn face. I love him so much, but there is much to hear, I assume, of how the world has changed in my fugue. It was Ranni who answered Radahn for what would be a very long explanation. 3 long hours. Naruto did his best to ignore the crick forming in his neck. In total, it had taken roughly 3 hours for the group to explain to their wayward son just what had happened since his climactic battle with Melania had come to an explosive end. The blonde felt an abstract level of kinship for the big man, who, despite his size and power, was humble, eloquent, and patient, only asking questions or providing his insight when the other members of the family had incomplete knowledge. He was content to sit comfortably on his giant bed with his mother sitting in his lap like an oversized child, Raya sitting in hers in turn. They look like those nesting doll things, he observed glibly. You're all tiny to me. 20 feet of height difference really isn't much when you're over 400 feet tall. Kurama supplied, keeping Naruto's mind busy while the family talked shop. This was, after all, a family matter. This family tree sounds more like a bramble bush than a real tree. Don't I know it, to think that all 6 members of Ranni's biological family all have names that start with an R. If the little witch has her way, you'll probably have to come up with a name beginning with R in the distant future. Kurama rumbled, cackling off into Naruto's subconscious as the blonde sent a tirade of expletives his way. Something on your mind, Naruto? He was drawn back to reality by Ranni's words and realized that all 5 of the family members were looking at him inquisitively. Pinching the bridge of his nose in indignation, Naruto shook his head. Just an old fox being a pain in my rear. I swear he always gets extra catty after I've needed major healing. Radahn let out a hearty laugh, nearly shaking the room. Ah, I know the feeling all too well, noble Naruto. The first time I dropped from the sky, I broke a leg, and while it did not faze me all that much, Mother would not let me ride for a week, taking every moment to snipe a joke at my expense. The pair shared a knowing laugh until Rykard cleared his throat. The praetor d his beard thoughtfully, much as I relished the prospect of the vulpine fool of a consort being made jest of for his idiocy. Quite remarkable idiocy that would get anyone not so stubbornly strong killed. I might add, we face encroaching issues on more front than one. Which leaves us to wonder, where do we go from here? Radahn was quick to respond, using a colossal finger to tickle Raya's hair, which his niece appreciated. For now, I shall remain here until I am completely recovered and furnished with new armor. I shall send word to Jaren to marshal what little forces that still count themselves amongst my armies to stand with us should we need it. Other than that, I am content to make up for lost time. His beefy arm hugged his mother to him, planting a familial upon the crown of her head. Naruto turned his head to look over and saw that there was something amiss with Ranni. While usually she would have been able to hide her emotions behind the emotionless repose of a doll, her living face held far more visual tics about the turmoil that bubbled under the surface as she looked at Radahn. She slowly rose from her seat and made to quietly exit the room before Naruto caught her wrist. "What is thy meaning for stalling our exit?" "Something's eating you," he said softly with a thoughtful frown. He looked between his Ranni and the rest of her family. "You've been mostly silent for the last 10 minutes. Ranni made a discontent noise at the back of her throat. "I said all that needed to be said. Best to leave Radahn to his recovery. We hath other errands to be getting on with. One's more important than talking to a brother you thought lost, because I can tell you from experience that not speaking when you have the chance that's gonna haunt you later." "What more could haunt me for mine deeds?" Ranni bit out with veiled vitriol, none of it directed at her consort, whose hand remained ironclad around her wrist. She knew one answer, a prospect that filled her with more dread with each passing day, yet she was not brave enough to explain it to him. Naruto's face did not change, not a jot. He maintained a neutral sun in the raging storm of her heart. "I know there are some things that you still don't think you can tell me," he whispered, "and I'll admit that that hurts. But I think I know you well enough to say this is for something you did, not what you are going to do." Naruto leant in close, bruising a strand of blue-white hair behind Ranni's ear, and whispered into it. "I don't like seeing you sad, you know. So if you're gonna sit there and let yourself fall to misery when all you gotta do is talk, it falls to me to give you a push in the right direction. So do it for me." Inhaling sharply, Ranni's one unsealed eye glinted in the shadows cast by her hat, then nodded once and pulled at her wrist. Naruto did not protest as she approached the titanic form of Radahn. "Brother, there is something I must ask of thee, something that for all these years I have been unable to answer." Ranni slowly looked up into her brother's face, her words as clear as she could make them and 4 hands stapled in front of her. "Why did you hold back the stars?" Whatever mirth had been eked out of Radahn's face evaporated on contact with Ranni's question. He wordlessly shifted his weight in a gesture that his mother instantly understood, picking up Raya and carrying her off to the side to give the brother and sister space to speak. Rykard opened his mouth to interrupt, but Naruto fixed him with a sideways stare that stayed on his tongue. "I don't know what you want me to tell you, Ranni. If my actions did you or your followers harm, then I am sorry." Radahn ground out, his eyes closing. "Sorry thou art sorry." Ranni's hands ed into fists. The ground under her feet began to freeze and expand outwards to cover the floor, the temperature of the room dropping to the point where her breath was visible in clouds of steam. "What couldst thou be sorry for?" She jabbed a single accusatory finger at Radahn, oblivious of the boiling hot tears now pouring down her cheeks. Radahn took the fury head-on and did not flinch, even as frost formed on his knuckles, eyes remaining closed and face solemn. "Thou art the strongest of us, perhaps the strongest since Father or the absentee eternal. Yet when thou combatest our severed sibling you shackled your power by holding back the stars. You could hath won, yet you maintain thy scourge of the stars. You subjected yourself to such abject misery to do something that need not be done. If anyone need to apologize, then it is I." She grabbed at her legs feeling weak under her. In a moment, Naruto was at her side, holding her in place to help her stand, his face worried but willing to let her continue. "I started this. I set in motion the night. Mine own machinations killed Godwin, shattered Mother's reason, shattered the very fate of the lands between ... Yet still. Naruto placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, her final words coming out as a frigid whisper. "Yet still thou would rather hold the stars and rot than simply wash thy hands of me." "Why?" Radahn stayed silent, biding his time until he was sure that Ranni was finished. No, that wasn't it, Naruto realized. He was making sure that his sister was okay. "No more." Radahn's words brokered no response. "I failed to bring Father back to Mother's side, failed to keep you from the Finger's machinations, failed to stop you from the night nor the shattering that followed. When I looked into the night sky, to the stars that would govern the fate of Carria's descendants, I declared, no more." Gold eyes opened, a sad intensity to them as their owner continued to speak. "No more fated doom, no more prewritten ends, no more outer gods, no more subverted tarnished, no more greater will, no more." Radahn boomed, the many mattresses begging to shake and float behind him. "No, the very land itself quaked at his intensity. Even if I had to rot for 1,000 years, to the heavens above or hell below, those stars would no more dictate the fate of my family until naught but sun and moon brightened their lives." Silence. It reigned between brother and sister with a tension that could be cut by the moonlight greatsword itself. Decades, if not centuries, of tension coming to a climactic crescendo in a single exchange of words. Why must the men Idith love be so ardently stubborn? A push, that was all it took. The most gentle of nudges from Naruto sent Ranni running forwards, her hat falling to the side as she threw herself into her brother's arms, her slight form tiny against his bulk. She buried himself into his and with no shame for those who watched on began to bawl, I missed you, big brother. Radahn brought his sister into a gentle embrace, his titanic head resting atop hers, no more than I missed all of you. There was nary a dry eye in the room, save for Naruto, who smiled a glimmering smile, happy that the siblings were truly united again. As he stepped back to allow the group to slowly heal, Naruto would never know the thoughts that passed through General Radahn, Scourge of the Stars' mind as he looked at his strong back. It's you are the sun that gives my moon her light. It's not much further, over the next rise. Do your best to keep up, boy, Ranni said over her shoulder, her tall form astride a strong-looking mare with a glossy black coat. I'm trying, but well, to be honest, I'm still kinda new to horse riding, Naruto called back, his legs flailing a little in the stirrups. In comparison to Ranni's midnight black steed, Naruto's was a mare with a speckled brown and white coat. Do the equine not traipse across the land of thy birth? For if not, it may be a curious land indeed. The queen's horse maintained an even canter up the steep track they were currently making their way up, the younger and clearly less experienced beast of burden following from behind. No, we had horses, but when most of my people are taught how to get across the land and trees on foot, the only people who end up needing to ride are nobles who don't train or peasants. Naruto explained, fumbling with the reins. Instantly he bit his lip, realizing he may have just indirectly compared the powerful queen to a peasant. A giggle radiated from Ranni, her shoulders set aquiver by the blonde's brusque words. A world where those fleet of foot could outpace the bluid carriage dwellers, a most appealing prospect indeed. Naruto smiled, he preferred this side of Ranni's mother. While the trio of siblings were taking the time to collectively heal their long-shattered bond, Naruto had found himself in a rare moment of listlessness these last few days. Usually, he would be bothering Eiji about that weapon or checking on Blade, but with the influx of new arrivals as of late, everyone was busy. Ergo, it was with great surprise that this morning, Ranni had appeared before him this morning with the request to come riding with her, shoving a pair of spurs into his hands. After getting over the initial confusion and the simple yet complicated process of putting spurs on, Naruto had found himself embarking on his first true lesson at riding a horse. In hindsight, he didn't understand why anyone could ride such an animal that gave your ass such a busting. Compared to his outfit, which had only gained a pair of silver spurs, Ranni was a far departure from her usual long robes and crown. She donned a form-fitting black bodice over which she donned a red female waistcoat and riding coat of midnight blue. Her legs, long and limber, were adorned in matching riding breeches with an internal red stripe, tucked into polished knee-high boots with spurs. Moreover, her long black hair had been drawn into a high ponytail that swished from side to side as she rode. And when it was said that she rode, both legs over either side of the horse as opposed to the expected side saddle of some ladies. All in all, it was a bizarre experience that had taken Naruto this deep into Liurnia, but he enjoyed it all the same, a nice change of pace, so to speak. Where are we going again, you damn slave driver, he questioned, his last words muttered under his breath. The carrying queen was sharper than he gave her credit, turning her head halfway over her shoulder to send him an amused glare. Lest I remind you again, I am mad, not hard of hearing. If you want to complain, then do it with a strong voice, she said, not angry at him at all. In fact, she as of late her mood could be described as positively elated, and while she had her lapses back into delirium from time to time, having a task in mind kept her on the straight and narrow. Reaching the top of the rise, the unlikely do came to a stop, gaze falling upon a large structure that was unmistakably a castle, though not quite as large as the academy or even Radahn's former abode. Letting out an appreciative whistle, patting his steed as it whinnied, "That's some castle, I take this is what you brought me out here for." It was not a question. Nodding surely, Ranni pointed at the castle. "This is the Carrion Manor, the ancestral seat of my family. I reasoned it would be a good plan to reclaim from its current infestation." Peering closer, Naruto struggled to see what she meant until a shifting shadow caught his attention by the main portcullis. A large thing skittered in the mist, many dozens of limbs undulating together to create motion. For a moment, he thought it a spider and was going to make a comment when Ranni whipped her catalyst from its resting place and swung it in a lateral arc. A lance of semi-solid blue energy shot from the staff's tip before lancing through the misty gloom, parting the lingering precipitation with a sonic boom before nailing the errant creature in its body, throwing it into the air and nailing it to the wall where it spasmed in twitching horror. The mist unveiled and illuminated by the spear of magic currently impaling it to a wall, Naruto still had trouble saying what it was. Then he saw the giant rings. A hand. Ranni nodded, finger creepers. The final form of this plague of grafting that has swept the lands. And while its origin mayhap lay with Godric, I can't idly let it plague my home when my children have finally come home. No more would anything decidedly finger-shaped, in turn, shape her family. She met his gaze, her glossy lips parting. "Will you join me?" Bonding through combat. Naruto couldn't imagine a better way to break the ice. "You bet, those things are hella creepy anyways. I take thou art armed?" she asked, seeing a long brown of some weapon tucked into the blonde's saddlebags. Grinning, Naruto withdrew the familiar form of the serpent hunter. He was not about to let such a good weapon go to waste. While Iji works on something from me, I guess this will do. It shall more than suffice. Now, come. Ranni dug her spurs into her horse's flank, pushing it to gallop towards the gates of her home with catalyst in hand and spells thrumming with mana. Not wanting to be left behind, Naruto did the same, seeing now just how this woman had long ago stalemated armies with sorceries alone. Their slaughter was quick, thorough, and without mercy. Every piece of grafted filth was put to the sword and tossed out to the wolves to feast upon as nothing but desiccated chunks. They went by area, Naruto's sage senses seeking them out before either dicing them apart with spellfire or driving the serpent thunder into their tough innards. It was surprisingly cathartic for Naruto, an end to his listlessness, but he got the feeling that the feeling was more real for Ranni's mother. She was after all quite literally putting her house in order. When they had at last chopped the last finger crawler to viscera and left it on a pyre of blue fire to burn away, Naruto found himself pleasantly aching. But he saw that his pest control partner was looking at him with emotion-thick eyes before turning on her heel and beckoning him to follow. They walked in silence until she came to the central building that rose in Gothic spires above a hall that the full moon queen pushed open with a wave of her hand. Swinging in on aged, rusted hinges, the doors produced a horrid screech that rent the air, but Naruto remained unflapped, following Ranni into the dark hall. For every step they made inside, torches of blue spellfire ignited around them, illuminating the hall, which was mostly untouched save for dust, and while it was mostly empty, there were two objects at the far end that caught his attention. A pair of thrones. You and my daughter doth court one another, and while I might at times find thy antics to be annoying, I cannot deny the joy that you bring to my family and her, even returning her to flesh as yet untouched by Amphion. Ranni explained, slowly approaching the pair of thrones, but if you shall court through to the very end, if you shall become my son by wed, it falls to me to tell thee of thy place. Approaching the larger of the two thrones, engraved with glintstone and gilded filigree, Ranni ran a hand over it. My family is matriarchal by nature. Have you noticed that while Radahn is my firstborn, he is a general, not a prince, and Rykard, a praetor of distant Volcano Manor, only little Ranni bears the title of princess. When the time comes, she shall sit here, Dark Moon Queen of Caria. Naruto's eyes widened for two reasons. The first was the implication of what marrying into such a family would mean for him, and the second was that he had finally put two and two together with why the throne looked familiar to him. It was a large, much more ostentatious version of the little wooden chair from Ranni's Rise. Wordlessly, he looked at the second throne, smaller but no less plush nor ornate, the throne of a king consort. Why are you showing me this? Mayhap I simply wish to see a glimmer of what might be after an eternity of stagnancy. But I think I needed to set the stage for some motherly advice. Ranni whispered, laying a hand on Naruto's shoulder. Promise me, you shan't do as we did. Do not let the happiness of what could be slip away to madness once again. Naruto's eyes hardened. I won't. Promise me, the full moon queen begged. I promise. And those words set them both free. They left the Carian manor shortly after, taking a contingent of long-lost troll knights with them, the great beasts in Carian armor happy to see their queen after so long and all too eager to rejoin her growing retinue. It was this odd gaggle lumbering and galloping forms that a figure on horseback observed through a pair of binoculars from a distant rise, her body clad in consecrated steel and unalloyed gold, her helm proudly displaying the sigil of the Hallowed Tree. Loretta bit her lip to the point where it nearly bled, conflict raging at the heat of her plate, unsure of what course to take. She had been hearing many bizarre and seemingly impossible things coming from the land of her birth, ranging from the movements of a spectral golden creature, the seeming death of the recusants, and the apparent turn of Elden Lord Godfrey. So she had ventured deep into Liurnia to see the truth from the lies, and what she had found made her insides twist into knots. The Queen of Caria, a woman whose magical might had stalemated Lord Radahn and made him her husband, a woman thought lost to madness, rode once more. The blasphemous praetor Rykard returned to his senses, and most troubling and impossible of all, word that General Radahn had been freed from the rot. Impossible, simply impossible. Lady Melinia's scarlet rot could not be undone. But she could not deny the truth before her eyes, and it galled her that she did not know what to do. Liurnia was her home, where she was born and bred, raised to be a knight and serve the Carian royals, something she had abandoned after the shattering drove Ranni mad, instead pledging herself to Lord Miquella. What had once been glintstone adornments to her armor was now unalloyed gold. Her path in loyalty to the Hallowed Tree was unquestionable. But still, Lady Melania's scarlet Aeonia reduced half a continent to rot in an attempt to kill Radahn. It was a tragedy, all for nothing if he once again lives without madness. What am I to do? After an eternity of dithering, Loretta turned her steed away from the retreating Carian host, a single thought in her heart. I must awaken Lady Melania. You're mad, Ranni. This is a simple calculus. It's them or us. There is still much to do, Rykard, and I will not have us marching to war again when things could be so much easier to resolve. Naruto felt the beginnings of a conniption scratching at his mind as he listened to brother and sister argue on either side of the table that they were using as a war room. A large and comprehensive map of the lands between covered its entire length, adorned with several wooden, metal, or stone monuments to mark specific points of interest from the Erdtree to Rhea Lucaria. Can the both of you just take a second to cool off? There's enough hot air blowing between you to trigger a thunderstorm. Naruto reasoned, trying to bring their argument to an end only to be ignored entirely. Rykard thumped the table, setting its models quavering. We have many great runes under our control. Between Mother's returned retinue, my former recusants, and those trickling in from Kaled, we have the biggest army since the Shattering. As it stands, if it truly is Godfrey pushing up from the south, then let us meet in the field. That's a stupid plan, Rykard, and you know it, Naruto blasted back, Ranni nodding in agreement to her consort's words. This needs a scalpel, not a sledgehammer unless it's unavoidable. Were you if not a sledgehammer and iron rod to break against that would stand for the Golden Order or against us? You are with us. Radahn is with us. All we need do is just a few more men and we can stall out Godfrey's menials for long enough that we can acquire the rest of the runes. Ranni wrapped her 4 hands around the table. Nay, we stay to the course and find Nokron. I would not have war again if it can be helped. I'm not fond of seeing war again either, Naruto added quietly. Rykard scoffed. And what would you know of war? Barely a score old and you think yourself some long-juried master of martial prowess? Did I truly fall to an idiot such as this, so innocent to war? Ranni felt the air in the chamber change, and watched Naruto's hair shadow his eyes, his face grim. Rykard took this as a sign he had cowed the blonde and pushed his advantage. No words, to be expected, no experience in real war and how loss is a necessity. Why don't you just go back to your chambers and let mine sister attend to your bruised pride while I speak of work? This is not a war. Faster than any of them could have understood, Naruto's arm had glowed with golden light and a spectral chakra arm had expanded, striking out to lock around Rykard's throat like a viper. Raising his head, Ranni was shocked to see that Naruto's face had changed, still as young but lined, a facade cracking to reveal utter seriousness beneath, his eyes molten gold with cross-shaped pupils. This is a squabble. He spat the word as if it were poison. Brother fighting brother, sister fighting sister, and for what scraps? I fought in a bigger war than any of you will ever know. I did worse things than you could ever imagine. And when I close my eyes I hear more screams than anyone could ever be able to count. And do you want to know what you do with all that pain? Shall I tell you where you put it? You hold it tight till it burns your hand. And you say this: no one will ever have to live like this. No one else will ever have to feel this pain. Not on my watch. Ranni stilled, a strange beat in her heart. When you take that first stab, no matter how right you feel, you have no idea who's going to die, whose children will scream and burn, how many hearts will be broken, how many lives shattered, how much will spill until everyone does what they were always going to have to do from the beginning: sit down and talk. The arm dissolved into particles of golden light. Rykard rubbed at his throat as he gasped for air. Naruto turned on his heel and made for the door. Talk between brother and sister before you have nothing left, just dust and echoes. She found him in their room sometime later, curled up in bed with his back facing her as she sat down beside him. Naruto did not speak as Ranni slowly sat beside him and watched him silently, nor did he say a word when she slowly wrapped her 4 arms around him from behind, modest bust pressing into his back. Warm. He was so very warm, yet Ranni knew that this was wrong. Someone so bright should not be left in the dark alone. Naruto, Ranni said, her voice a whisper. Ranni, he replied, voice flat. I am glad thou fell from the sky that day, and while asking for secrets of your past is somewhat unfair given mine own reticence. Know that I shall be with you until the end. Slowly, Naruto turned in her arms to face her, his face still so very old, but a glimmer of light returned to the deep blue depths of his eyes. His arms encircled her in turn, and their foreheads pressed against one another. Sensation. How she had missed this. Or was it love I craved after so long alone? Of those who thought that, none could say. For now, 2 lonely souls embraced in their bed with no violence or war in their minds. Only the joy that being with the love of your life brings. I can never let this slip away. Both thought, their eyes drifting closed with smiles, small but genuine, planted firmly on their faces. Ranni drew away first. Touch me. He ran a finger along the back of her leftmost hand, trailing it up her arm to her shoulder. She shivered. You felt that? She did. After going so long without, her body was admittedly sensitive. Such would change in time, but now. She surged upright. For all the strife of the night, the madness of the shattering or profane horror of these last centuries, that night, there was a change. That night, all of Raya Lucaria slept peacefully. We must seek out Nokron at once. And Naruto looked up from the book he was reading as Ranni approached him. That a bit sudden, don't you think? Ranni pursed her lips. She wasn't letting him skirt the subject, not this time. Rather than retort as he no doubt wished her to, she sat in his lap and took a moment to peer at the tome in question. Curious. She thought it would be a book of jokes or some such, but no, it seemed to be a fascinating tome on swordplay. Perhaps he was eager to put his new weapon to use. Of course she could give him a true sword. No, her face went red at the thought as her mind ran away from her. Not yet. Was much too soon, surely. Wasn't it? Ranni. Right. She must attend to them. She shifted her weight against his and trapped him in place with her body. Blue eyes rose to meet her gaze, mildly confused perhaps, but she had his attention all the same. Books were all well and good, but a beautiful woman sitting in his lap, wearing naught but her undergarments, that was distracting. It warmed her more than words to know she could evoke such a reaction in him, especially after last night. As well she should be. They'd not done the deed yet, but they'd come close, almost perilously so. Even now she found her focus slipping. She wanted to push him out the chair, knock him down, and have her way with him. Or him with her. She wouldn't mind either, frankly. Focus. There was tasks to which she must attend. I was speaking of Nokron. she said instead, using one of her many hands to snatch the book out Naruto's grasp, even as another pair settled about his waist. She used the third to cup his face when he frowned at her, fingers tracing over a whiskered cheek. That came out of nowhere. A curious note threaded its way into his voice. She wasn't sure she liked it. What brought this about? Not by choice but necessity. Her fourth hand came back around to settle on his shoulder. The agents of the Greater Will won't sit idly by as we gathered our strength. Time we spent dallying here in Rhea Lucaria is time wasted. We can afford to tarry no longer. I thought you didn't want war. I do not. And she didn't. What she wanted was to break the cycle, shatter the wheel as it were, take the power from the gods and give it back to the people. Even if that meant leaving the lands between. They'd not spoken of that argument since it first reared its ugly head. She knew a reckoning was coming, but it would not be today. Perhaps putting it off wasn't wise, but she couldn't bear to speak of it now. In the end, she shook her head. Better to be prepared for naught than to be found wanting in times of crisis. Fair. He was still digging his heels in. She couldn't blame him. He'd grown comfortable here. They both had. How best to motivate him? Then no, not motivation. She owed him a great debt, more than words could possibly hope to describe. My immediate family is whole once more thanks to thee. She leaned in, lips brushing his. I shall not forget what you have done. This I swear to thee. Ask anything of me and it will be yours. You don't have to. She growled. I want to, and so I shall. Heh. Her consort smiled. You are kinda cute when you sulk out. His voice peaked in a laugh when she pinched his cheek. All right. I'll take your favor. Seriously. Pinky promise. He reached up with a lazy hand and hooked his little finger in one of hers. Might save it for a rainy day. Ranni felt her face burn anew. You had best, consort of mine, and you would do well to watch thy wagging tongue. Come on now. He laid his hands on her hips, pulling her close. Where's the fun in that? A frisson of delicious warmth pooled in Ranni's core. Her body was still deliciously sensitive still and likely would be for some time yet. Ordinarily she disdained such hypersensitivity, but here and now she found herself reveling in it all the same. His hands came back to caress her hips, drifting lower now to hold her rear as her own danced across his. Was neither rough with her nor gentle, but some mad blend of the two that left her crazed with desire. She liked being able to feel again, to touch, to taste his lips against hers, to hear her heart pounding frantically in her ears as it was now. She just couldn't help herself. She had him softly, then tilted her head to deepen it, holding him fast as she leaned in. Blind, the viciousness of her own thoughts momentarily alarmed her. No one else could have him. She would sooner die than give him to another. But she may well have to, if only to ascend. If she did not, her goals, her dream, could never be realized. She would have to leave him, soon. Seek out the wretched two fingers hiding away from her, and then the thought made her heart ache and turned her desire to ash in her mouth. No, she shoved it away with a snarl. No, don't think of that. Now don't ruin the moment. Did you say something? Naruto was looking to her now, trusting her implicitly. Sometimes she wished he wouldn't. No, stilling her traitorous heart, she leaned back with a sigh. Not a thing. Will you take me to Nokron, then? They would do this together. She would look him in the eye, deep under the earth, and explain it all to him. She owed him that much, and who knew, perhaps she might yet convince him to join her on that final journey, to leave this world behind. Such was her hope, her plea, her most fervent wish. I was thinking we could bring Blade with us. That would not be wise. He's been acting rather odd. She knew why but feared to say it. Once the treasure of Nokron was found, there could be no turning back. Surely they could find a way to save him. And if they could not, then at least they could spare him the pain. In any case, I've not seen him since he went after Celovus. The blonde brow quirked. You sent him after that weasel. You were concerned. He needed something to do. I thought it prudent. An awful thought occurred to her. Did you wish to kill him yourself? Kinda. He shrugged. But Blade's a good boy. He's got this, as you say. But back to Nokron. He sighed. Ranni, do not Ranni me. She smacked his, for all the good it did her. We must be quick about this. If there truly is an army rising up from the south, then the path to Nokron may soon be blocked, and I would not have mother learn about this. She will try to stop us. Let her try. You say the nicest things. She leaned into him and thought no more of such things. Blade wasn't hard to track. He burned like a beacon in his brain, a dying fire in the mind's eye, hard to find at first, but easy enough to locate once he knew what to look for. A quiet tip from Renala had helped spur him on his way, all in exchange for a single question. He felt it was a worthy exchange, even if she'd embarrassed him terribly. Renala had smiled knowingly at the two of them. When can I expect grandchildren from the two of thee? Ranni had sputtered incoherently. He remembered that well. Naruto very nearly choked on his own spit himself. Soon didn't seem like much of an answer, but he'd said it anyway, if only to see Ranni's reaction. They hadn't rightly done the deed, not yet, but he looked forward to the day they did. These days the idea of children running around underfoot didn't terrify him now as much as it once had. He'd always wanted a family, and the idea of brash boys and grasping girls made him smile a little. Was it too soon to start picking out names? He thought so, but the idea wouldn't let him. Thoughts of the future warmed him just as well they did, because the sight he found chilled his. He located Blade on an island well outside the academy grounds. Ranni's loyal hound was hunched beneath a tree, looming over a gaunt-robed figure that vaguely resembled a humanoid corpse. Skewered clean through by his greatsword, dragged behind him in a trail of like some grisly trophy. he nevertheless clung tight to his prize, leaning against the hilt of his weapon for balance. Kurama sensed the disquiet first. Careful, now. He's not quite himself. He knew Blade wasn't, but there was nothing to be done for it yet. You all right there, big guy? Ranni's shadow rounded on him just a little quickly, and for an awful moment he glimpsed a feral gleam in his eye. Hey, he raised both hands, just as he had once before. Friendly, remember. HRRNGH. He shook his head. Forgive me. You startled me, there. You're grouchy today. What got under your skin? Blade turned to face him. His was red. Naruto recoiled. Hoy, it's not my. The half-wolf ran a hand down his, idly patting the battered armor. I found that traitor and ran him through. Chopped him into little bits, just to be sure. He sounded pleased with himself, waiting, but there was a note of something else there, something darker, as though he were waiting for praise. Serves him right, doesn't it? He turned and hawked a wad of phlegm onto what he could only assume was the body of Celovis. Now I just need to find his master and we can be done with this. Still he paused, waiting for praise. Naruto gave it. You did good. Yes, Blade seemed to stand a little straighter at that. I did, didn't I? I'm sure Ranni will be pleased. Did you need me for something, mate? Time to break it to him, then. We're headed to Nokron. A fur of light flitted through the wolf's weary eyes. At last. I'll join you, of course. He was holding on by a thread even now. But to deny him might make things worse. Good. He settled for a sigh instead. Let me know if that headache of yours gets any worse. All right, I don't want anything to happen to you. Will do. Blade bobbed a nod. I'm off to the academy then. You coming with? In a bit. Naruto forced a smile he didn't quite feel. You go on ahead. Have it your own way. I'll meet you there. He watched Blade lope away, dragging Celovis' body behind him like the trophy it was. Something was wrong with him. He couldn't quite tell what it was, only that he could sense it all the same. He'd need to keep an eye on him in the future if only to prevent disaster. He hadn't lost anyone so far, and he'd be damned if he began with Blade. Everything would be all right. It had to be. He would make it so. Do you truly believe that? If so, I envy your faith. Soft words rang through his mind. He winced. Kurama, that wasn't me. I would speak with you, Herald of Gold. The voice came on again, faint and indistinct. Who was it, a man, a woman? He couldn't tell. Their words were distorted, echoing, as though from a great distance. Might I borrow a moment of your time? His brow furrowed. We're doing that right now, aren't we? HMM. The voice hummed. So we are. I would ask you a question. Shoot. Shoot what I do not understand. A muscle jumped in his jaw. It means speak, you know. Very well. A poignant pause followed. I have observed your efforts for some time now. Where does he go? I wondered, why does he act as he does? You have fought hard for the sake of this world. To what end do you seek the throne? Will you mend the Elden Ring or bring forth a new age? I would know your aims before we progress any further, lest we reach the point of no return. Apparently this one liked their riddles. Don't see why it's any interest to you. It is very much of interest to me. A note of heat crept into their voice. I dedicated my... He blinked. Forgive me. The nameless voice muttered. I did not come to her argue. I merely wished to warn you. Ranni the witch, your witch, is not to be trusted. She will betray you as she betrayed me, as she betrayed our family. I don't believe you. Believe what you wish, it is of little consequence. She will betray you. If not now, then later. Once she has the blade in hand, she will cast you aside. That old argument again. He hadn't wanted to believe it back then, and he didn't want to believe it now. Even now you do not believe. When will you learn? The voice grew rife with scorn, dripping with derision. Your witch isn't the hero of this story. She is the one who started this. Countless lives suffer because of her, all because she did not wish to be leashed. He looked away with a scoff. Is there a point to his? Heed my words. I once thought the same as you do. She was the of my. We were family, she and I, and yet she damned us all the same. Enough games. His brow furrowed. Get out of my head. As you wish. In due time, you will see. The silence was his answer. Do not let go of mine hand. Naruto bit his lip and tried to back a grin. Ranni must have seen it, because she absolutely scowled over her shoulder. Must you be so insufferably smug? Yes, I must. He had a good reason to be, for all her arrogance. Ranni was the one clinging to his hand as she led them. The lunar princess was afraid of the dark. Who would have thought? Nokron was, well, he didn't quite have the right words for it. One-word answers just didn't seem to cut it here. Beautiful, lively, old. He could see ruins all around as far as the eye could see. Rather than the gloomy cavern ceiling, he gazed upon a false sky of stars above. Down into the depths they went, down past rock and stone and into darkness. Blade plodded behind them, not entirely silent, but watchful and annoyed. He too had a good reason to be grouchy. Do I have to wear this white thing? My ears are itching. Naruto stabbed a finger backward without looking. Keep that helmet on, buddy. Ranni's shadow huffed but otherwise didn't protest. Not that he could tell if he was with that helmet he was wearing. The miniature mirror helmet Iji crafted for him was a good start to keeping the greater will at bay, but a temporary one at best. Temporary and fragile. One hard blow might shatter it to pieces, and even if it didn't, Blade could hardly wear it for the rest of his life now. Could he know the helmet was there as a stopgap measure? Nothing more. Something moved in the dark ahead of them. Ranni squeaked. Naruto wagged a brow at her. Scared, are we? Nay, she silenced it with a spellbolt. A ghastly pale figure toppled out of the shadows ahead of them. Others fled soon thereafter. No more challenges were made, nor ambushes attempted. It didn't stop her fuming. He hadn't a clue where they were headed, but he trusted in Ranni's directions as always. She hadn't led him or blade astray yet. She will. Stop that. There it was, that voice from yesterday. Next she guided him and blade through ancestral woods filled with strange horned creatures and enchanting singing. Had he been alone, he would have happily wandered that way to investigate. Alas, there were things to do and they had a mission to complete, preferably before Ranala and the rest realized they were gone. Ranni led the way without fail, barely saying a word. That said, their journey certainly didn't lack for entertainment. Her first true obstacle was a great big brute with a mighty sword and a horned shield. He refused to speak with them, and was defeated in similar silence. The second was a strange creature, a teardrop of metal that could mimic any one being at a time. Against 3 it was spoiled for choice and made the mistake of hesitating 3 guesses as to how that ended. Friends. First 2 don't count. Really, the worst danger they dealt with upon reaching the lost city wasn't so much the enemies within, but the terrain hopping across sloping rooftops, navigating twists and turns, evading enemies and the like. After all, they didn't have to fight all those mimic tiers down there, did they? The worst of them could be avoided easily enough or outright run around. Stealth was simple for a shinobi, less so for an Empyrean and her half-grazed shadow. Of course, there was more to it than that. Must you carry me like this? Carry whom? Like what? Naruto hummed as he continued his descent. You said you couldn't make these jumps, remember? I'm helping. I said mine legs were still unsteady. She kicked in his arms, looking every bit a petulant child as his shadow clones paused to open another door and raid another treasure. Not that thou need carry me like. Naruto drawled, wearing a shite-eating grin as he took another jump. You're a big girl, Ranni. Use your words. Thou knowest full well what this looketh like. I look like a princess. Gotcha. Naruto snickered. Blade chortled behind them. Really, I think it's kinda cute. Ranni absolutely hissed. Thou art a traitor and a fiend, my shadow. No dice. She was full on pouting now. She slapped his with 2 hands as he performed another limber leap, looking more vulnerable than he'd ever seen her. No doubt she would have used all 4 to smite him if she weren't clinging to him for dear life with the other 2. Well, you're a princess to me. And then, just because he knew it would mess with her, he dipped down and at her pale forehead. Ran stiffened like the puppet she no longer was. He took wicked pleasure in watching her face go red. Would you look at that? You really can blush now. Ranni made angry Ranni noises and buried her head in his. Naruto would have howled with laughter, but he knew that would have got him an ice sorcery in the face. Well worth the smile though. Still holding Ranni, he hopped over 1 mimic tier, kicked another's head off in midair, locked his legs around a 3rd skull and slammed them to the ground. Ranni squirmed out his grasp the moment he landed. The mimic tiers did not die well. Showtime. His head ached. Blade shook it off with a growl. It was just a headache. That was all. Just a headache. All too easy. In truth, Ranni found herself concerned by just how easy it was. When it finally came to a fight, as all things often did, the defenders of Nokron were no match for the 3 of them. Those who did not fall to her cold sorceries were summarily trampled by Naruto and Blade. Although the mimic tiers fought as they were meant to, it was a rout. And for what against an Empyrean, her consort, and her shadow there was no contest. There could never be. Only one obstacle yet remained. Their enemies had been bested, their defenses destroyed, and the treasures of Nokron lay bare for the taking. As did the. She didn't walk towards it. Ranni ran. Perhaps that was childish of her, but she couldn't help herself. Because here at last, she had it. Her goal, her dream, her destiny. Seizing the lid with all 4 hands, she pushed hard. Nothing happened. She strained and strove and struggled, but still it wouldn't open. Lady Ranni. Blade sighed. He sounded fondly exasperated with her. Hush, Blade, I have this well in hand. She strained further still, feet sliding, arms heaving till she was red in the face. I just need. Naruto chuckled. Do not give me such a look. Ranni turned her most smoldering stare upon him, desperately trying to quell the embarrassment she felt. This must be charmed against my kind. How else would it fail to open? You sure you're not strong enough? He was having her on. Maybe that's what you're getting for putting all your points into intelligence. Her brow furrowed. What was that? Mine consort. Nothing here, let me have a go at it. He reached past her, placed 1 hand on, then pushed. A lazy shove pushed it open with ease. Light shone through. Naruto stepped aside and beckoned. Ladies first. Ranni scowled and reached into it. Something warm greeted her grasp. Was this? It was her hand emerged clutching a wicked blade. She gasped and observed the wickedly curved instrument with naked awe. So this was it, then. The Finger Slayer blade. She'd heard tell of it, but to see it, to hold it in her hand was another matter entirely. With this, she whispered, I shall at last carve my own destiny. Nasty thing. Naruto whistled. But hey, you finally got it. Was it worth it? Ranni managed a nod. Gingerly, she hooked the blade into her belt. The deed was done, but she was not. The enormity of her task came crashing down on her a moment later. She had her weapon. Now, Shesh would have to leave soon, wouldn't she? Leave and seek out the 2 fingers that sought to control her wherever they hid, though she knew not where at present. After Thatno she'd need to tell him. She took a deep breath. Naruto, Something moved in her peripherals. Her consort nudged her aside almost gently as 7 feet of steel perforated the space he'd stood in. A furious howl reached her a moment later, then the beast was upon them. Blade. His helms must have cracked in the fight. Naruto grabbed the blade, launching both it and her feral shadow over his shoulder. His skull struck the ground, shattering what remained of the helmet. He betrayed the greater will, so he turned on Yaoi. He blocked a blow that would have run her through. Easy there, big guy. A hand rose, causing wide red eyes to fix upon him. Just calm down. You remember us, right? Blade dove at him, fangs bared. A roundhouse sent him stumbling. Calm down. Ranni winced. Do not hurt him. He's trying to hurt me. He swayed back, blocked the blade and shoved him. Isn't there anything you can do? There might be, but she was understandably loath to do it. No matter, he would forgive her when he came to his sense. Her eyes snapped to Blade. Sit. Her shadow's body locked down and slammed face first into the dirt, bound by gravity magic. Thank the moon for Radahn. She'd never saw a use for the spell as a child, but she was suddenly inordinately glad he'd taught her all those years ago. The command only worked once a day, and even then only for a moment, but it was enough for her purposes. Now, Naruto jumped him. Golden hand clamped down on either side of his head. Ranni tensed, fearing the worst. He didn't yank. Instead, her dear consort wrestled him down and held. Gotcha, he rasped. Huh, easier than I thought it would be. Now let's just reach in there and... Blade yelped as he hadn't since he was young, spasmed once, and went limp. Got it. Naruto tumbled off his back with a pain cry of his own. Ouch, my head. Ranni hurried to his side. You broke the greater will's hold over him. Not quite. Horror dawned in her. Tell me you didn't bind yourself in this place. Didn't, the whiskered warrior grumped, rubbing at his head with a wince. I just connected myself to it for a second. Had to do that to break the bond. There's so much anger and hate. He turned wide eyes on her. You defied it and hurt it and it hates you for that. His words flowed together. You have to kill it, because I don't think it'll ever stop hating you. Something rumbled overhead. Blade mumbled a groan. What is that? Ranni followed his gaze. There was an awful red viscera dripping from above, and with it, dark laughter. A trap of some sort. Naruto squinted up at it. Might want to get on that teleport spell of yours. T-was easy enough. Ranni raised all four of her arms and cast a quick cantrip. Her magic remained powerful as ever. It would be the work of a moment to teleport them back to Raya Lucaria. The air shimmered around her as she drew on the full breadth of her power, glowing from within. She squinted her eyes against it. Finally it faded. And she saw, this isn't Raya Lucaria. No, an all too familiar voice intoned. I'm afraid not. Welcome, honored guest. It's been some time. Ranni's ran cold. No, not here. Anywhere but here. Where were Naruto and Blade? The false skies of the Eternal City still loomed overhead, but her surroundings had changed. All around her she saw naught but gravestones. A shadow fell over her. Against her better judgment she turned to face it. Mohg, her half-brother, was even worse than she remembered. The last she'd seen of him he still had both eyes and at least some semblance of wits about him. But now, I'm terribly sorry to interrupt your spell, but I thought this a fine time to have a chat. What remained of his good eye was a twisted yellow color, his gnarled body DD in ornate robes sprouting horns from the oddest angles, his voice a gnarly rasp. After all, are we not family? They were, but wait, where was Naruto and Blade? Where are my companions if thou hast harmed them? Peace, dear sister. A clawed hand waved. I mean you no harm. You will be reunited with them shortly on the surface once we've concluded our business. What do you want? The omen tittered. Can we not talk for a moment? It's been so lonely down here. Cold sorceries sizzled at her fingertips. Mohg. Very well, the mad omen tutted. To business then. I have need of that finger-slaying blade you possess. Would you be so kind as to lend it unto me once you're done? Her brow furrowed. And why would I do that? Because little Ranni, he leered, I know what you seek and where it is. Her cold became so much ice. 'Tis a fair deal, no. He knew where her 2 fingers hid, and if I choose to wring it out of you, be assured that I won't talk, no matter the torture. His smile was an ugly thing to behold. Come now, you've made dark deals before. He offered her a gnarled hand. All I ask is a chance to wield the blade once you're done with it. Sometimes, the shortest path is the quickest way to victory. She winced. Mohg's voice was the sweetest of honey. You've made all manner of dark deals before, have you not? What's one more? Ranni dithered. It would make her vengeance swifter and spare her the search. But what would Naruto think? The Lord of tapped his trident against the ground. I haven't all day, dear sister. What will it be? Ranni was hiding something. Naruto wasn't sure who, what, or why exactly, only that she was. When questioned on her brief disappearance, her separation from their party, she did not answer him directly. Instead, she made excuses, insisted that it was nothing he need concern himself with. When he tried to press the matter, she fobbed him off with words and gentle touches designed to distract. Nothing is amiss, she said. I'm quite all right, she said. Let us go to bed, she said. She was lying. He rolled over in bed to glare at the ceiling avos, displeased with himself as much as the thought. The high, vaulted stones held no answers for him, and so he rolled over again. Times like these almost made him wish he didn't have this damn ability. Sensing negative emotions was usually a boon to him, always had been, but now it did him more harm than good. Still, he'd gone to bed with Ranni once they returned home, if only to ease the tensions from his mind. A bit of sleep usually put things to rights. It hadn't worked this time. A sleepy mumble recaptured his attention. 4 hands grasped at his, found a handhold, and yanked him closer. Who would have thought she'd be the little spoon he let her, and ran a hand through her smooth hair, then dipped lower, idly stroking her cheek. Ranni didn't stir from her sleep, though she did hold him tighter and snuggled her head into his. Poor girl. She looked so peaceful, so serene. Her body was pleasantly warm against his through her thin gown, no longer made of wood and string but flesh and bone, skin soft as satin as her hair tickled his chin. He wanted to close his eyes and fall back asleep, wrap his arms around her and forget all about this. And yet she had lied to him. Damn it. He planted a restless atop Ranni's head and slipped out her grasp. She let him go with a soft sigh, more a whimper, really. He nearly faltered for a moment, nearly gave up, nearly went back. It would be so easy. Just trust in her as he always had, blindly believe that she knew best, that they were doing what was best for the world. No, he needed to think, and he couldn't do that when he was holding her. Kurama heaved a small sigh. Boy, don't do anything stupid. I'm not, he muttered an annoyed aside. Of his own, just need to think. Silent footsteps carried him toward the door. It opened easily, making nary a sound. He slipped through and was gone. There was no destination in mind, no clandestine meeting to attend. He simply wandered the halls, taking the turns as they came. No one barred his path. Ranala and the rest were either busy making plans or sleeping likewise. He could sense Blade and Eiji in the northern wing, far away from him. All the while, his mind churned. Ranni was keeping secrets. Too many secrets. He'd accepted that before it wasn't any of his concern and he'd believed in her. But that belief had been rattled by her mysterious absence and subsequent silence upon her return. It might take some time on his part, and quite possibly a nudge from Blade besides, but he was certain she'd tell him what was ailing her eventually if he waited. Could he wait? He wasn't sure he wanted to. Meanwhile, their course was clear. The capital awaited. He doubted it would be quite so simple as Rykard envisioned, but they gained nothing by lingering in Rea Lucaria further. They needed to make a move. There was also the matter of these baleful shadows Ranni spoke of, whatever those damn things were, but he was sure he at least could deal with them. Are you certain? Naruto grit his teeth and nearly walked into a wall. He caught himself against it, fingers digging into the pale mortar. That voice again. It made his head hurt. Blade seemed right as rain since he'd broken the connection between him and the greater will, but these odd pulses persisted. They were annoying at the least of times, downright distracting at the worst. You were foolish to do that. It is aware of you now. The eye of a god is upon you. Be wary. Blasted voice. And here he thought he was finally rid of it once and for all. Even now he couldn't tell who it was, man or woman, boy or girl, or perhaps some eldritch beast. Whatever it was, it seemed intent on driving its every point home, which wouldn't have been a bother if he didn't disagree with everything it said. You would be rid of me. I have given you sound advice thus far. He paused, leaning against a wall. Shut up. I will not, dear boy. His fist cratered the stone. What do you want? I want you to see the witch for what she is. And you will. I shall make sure of it. I shall save you. Save me, he barked a laugh. I think you're confused. I'm the one who saves people. I don't need saving. Yes, you do. Ranni will betray you, as she betrayed us, as she betrayed everyone on that fateful night. The woman you know is a lie. Her smile is a lie. Her love is a lie. Everything about her is a lie. She tells falsehoods as easily as she breathes. He bit his tongue to stifle a retort. The voice sensed his hesitation and pounced. But you know this now, don't you? Has she lied to you at last? No, no, no. He wasn't rising to the bait. He refused to give it her any more fuel for the fire. Shall I tell you what she intends? But the voice had enough and it pressed on with a mournful sigh. She will leave you. First to seek the baleful shadows, then the two Fungers, again and again, until she ascends to the stars and never returns. You will be alone. His fist swung out with a harsh crack, obliterating the wall entirely. It did nothing for his doubt. Liar. Ask her then. You only know a small portion of her schmiz. In the end, spectral lips brushed his ears. You are expendable. Ranni woke alone and found his specter stood at the foot of her bed. She should have felt panic, fear, anger at least. Instead she felt only regret. He trusted you. The ghost growled at her, its voice an angry, low, hollow rasp. Just as I did. Will you betray him, too? She recognized them with a jolt. She dearly wished she hadn't. Another of her brothers. No, not hers. Not truly. They shared only. Nothing more. Whatever had once been between them was dust, ashes in the wind, nothing more and nothing less. In truth, she should have expected it. How ironic, for her old regrets to manifest themselves in such a form on the eve of her triumph. Ignoring them, she rose and rounded her bed, stepped to her, then began to dress herself. You're not real, Godwin. Aren't I? The specter spread their arms, eyes hidden in the gloom. It matters not, I suppose. Believe what you will. He scoffed at her as she donned her clothes. There's nowhere you can hide, Ranni. Put as much distance between you and the truth as you want. It changes nothing. Pretend to be everything you are not. Witch, wife, mother Tobe. She glowered darkly at the last word, tugging on a pale plate of wrought silver over her white dress. But there is one unavoidable truth you will never escape. The specter before her sneered as she completed her preparations. You cannot change. You made a deal with the devil, and you know it. You will always be. Ranni knelt and unwrapped the last parcel within. The dark moon greatsword gazed back at her within the gleaming with blue moonlight. A monster. She retrieved the blade reverently. A monster, her said. She knew this. Of course she did. She was one. After all, she had been selfish that night. She realized that now. In her hubris, she could have sought a different path. A better path. It would have been difficult perhaps, taken more time certainly, but at the end of the day, she hadn't. The fault was hers. She had chosen poorly, taken the easy way out, the path of least resistance, and the lands between had paid for it. By might and miracle her family had been reunited for the most part, but they would never truly be whole. She would bear that sin for the rest of her days. Such was her burden. 'Tis true, I know. The witch stood, staff in one hand, spell in another, sword now sheathed upon her back. She planned to give it to Naruto once she found him, to atone for a great many things. But I am your monster no longer. Steeling herself, she lifted her chin at him. After all, it takes one to know one. She pivoted to face them fully. Begone, brother. Remain where you belong, in my memories. She expected shock or anger from them. Warringly, she received neither of these things. So you say. The specter smiled grimly. You will try, dear sister. Very well, if words will not sway you then you shall see. And know your sin. Ranni bristled. What? Look, foul witch. Without warning, the world swam around her as she was granted vision, her sigh piercing the floors of stone, drilling to the deepest depths of the earth itself. Past fire, past rock, past water, past it all. There was something down there. Something large, something massive. Ranni didn't want to look at the thing. Didn't want to see. But she did. Look upon your work. Look at what you have made of me. She saw Godwin's ruined, bloated corpse. He was a rotten and wretched thing, festering in the roots of the Erd tree, grotesque and hideous. Clouds of hideous flies buzzed about it. Yet she recognized it. The blonde hair, the filmy eyes set in that twisted face, the blue cloth set about its waist, a waist which had since grown into a terrible tail like some sort of creature. And yet for all that, for all its deathly pallor it was alive. Yet Godwin turned its head toward her, saw her, somehow. Hello, sister. She recoiled. No, I never wanted that for you. And yet I became it all the same. Prepare yourself. Just as you took everything from me, so too shall I take everything from you. Something in her broke. It was her resolve. The vision receded, leaving her reeling. She had done this. She had. No other. She'd thought Godwin gone, slain perhaps, but not living as that thing. That grotesque creature, that abomination. It was too much. Ranni turned on her heel and bolted. No, that wasn't the right word for it. She ran. Where it didn't matter, so long as it was away from Godwin, away from that god-awful vision, away from it all. She crashed into the hall, tripped, righted herself and started running. Guilt hounded her every step. Her heart hammered in her ears, drumming relentlessly. Away. She had to get away. She must get away. Away from here and find him, face him down, before it was too late. Because she hadn't known. But it was still her fault. All her fault. She collided with someone and bounced backward. Hei's strong arms caught her, righting her at the last second. Naruto's startled face stared back at her, looking just as frazzled as she felt. Ranni, are you all right? What in blazes are you doing? Where are you going? She shook herself free and took a moment to master herself. Nowhere. Her beloved didn't budge. Doesn't look like nowhere to me. She forced a smile to her lips. I was merely going for a walk. You weren't. He looked aside, muttering to himself. Too many lies. The words were a knife of dread in her heart. She trembled a little. Pardon. His face closed down, blue eyes flinty and hard. You've been keeping secrets. What are you hiding? So that was it. Her spirits plummeted yet further. Naruto knew or suspected something. Whatever it was, it had aroused his anger. I am hiding nothing. She was hiding everything. She had made Godwin a monster and must make things right. You needn't concern yourself. Concerned anger sparked in his expression, his brow furrowing. I am concerned. Then noticed she had her staff. Were you planning to leave without telling me? Don't lie to me. I thought it for the best. She relented. This is for the good of the world. I have wrongs I must right. You would only try to stop me. His eyes hardened, and his expression with them. You thought right. Ranni tried to dart around him. He wasn't having it and grabbed one of her wrists. Her eyes flitted to his fingers. Unhand me. Not until we talk about this. Careful. Her voice fell to a low snarl. I am stronger now, stronger than you can possibly imagine. Are you? Now he scoffed, not believing her. You won't hurt me, just as I won't hurt you. The last fraying thread of her temper snapped. I said let go. Smack. A wave of blue light blasted Naruto out of the room, down the hall, and through a wall. Ranni froze, horrified with herself, though she hadn't meant to. Oh, Naruto righted himself with a groan. Fine. Guess we're having our first fight. Foolish boy, she hissed at him. This is something I must do alone. Stay down. Nope. He rose with a sigh. I promise never to leave you alone. His body burned like the sun. Hers shone with the stars. Golden light met blazing azure. His sun clashed with the moon and the former triumphed. Ranni lurched backward with a yelp, eyes wide as Naruto shattered her spell like so much glass and stalked her way. The sudden shock left her reeling. It made it seem easy. All too easy. She had known, of course, known all along how strong her dear consort was, how dauntless, how indomitable, quick and agile he could be when he wished to exert himself. He'd shown her time and again. But it was one thing to watch, another to see, and something else altogether to feel. She was certainly feeling it now. Heck, fresh breath burst from her lungs as his open palm blasted her in the stomach, knocking the wind clean out of her. Momentum took her in its teeth a moment later and ripped her from her feet, launching her down the hall in a mad tangle of arms and legs. Had he so desired, he could have torn her clean in half. That he didn't was as much a testament to his skill as restraint. It galled her to realize the gap between the two of them. Even now she was all but a goddess in her current form, and yet despite that, she could clearly see that he was handling her with kid gloves. That burned even more. A door opened behind her. Ranni mother poked her head out. What's going on out there? I see. You're having your first fight. I'll leave you to it then. Do try and give me some grandchildren by the end of it, won't you? Mother. The door said shut, leaving her to her fate. Naruto's voice called out to her as he strode forward. Gonna let me help you now? Never. Ranni righted herself, slapped one of her forehands on the ground and rendered the floor a sea of mana, all of which she hurled at all his way in a blazing beam of comet. With the second she cast a mist spell to obscure his vision. The third brought the ceiling down on his head, and finally a binding spell to restrain him where she knew he'd surely emerge from the rubble. 4 simultaneous attacks at once, forcing him to split his attention amongst them. She may as well have fed raindrops at him for all the good it did her. He walked right through it all, even let her restraining spell hit him and bind his arms to his sides. He didn't once slow his stride. A low growl built in the back of his throat as he bared his teeth at her. His eyes blazed gold and his hair set itself alight. His arms flexed, and those bands of light snapped like so much rusted iron. Had enough yet? Her temper sparked and she blasted him away in a torrent of astral light. You don't understand. Then make me. He caught her spell with one hand and waded forward, warding an arm before his face. It was enough to slow him, if only just. Or not. A golden flash of light heralded sudden movement, and then he was upon her, over her, no, under her, sweeping her up into his arms. Her face burned. Oh, so this was the legendary Princess Carrie Blade had been on about. T was a different thing indeed, being awake to experience it. Under any other circumstance she might have enjoyed it. Now, her unsealed eye widened. Unhand me at once. Not until you calm down. Calm? How could she possibly be calm? Her thoughts were a horde of dark hands, her white hat dragging her down until her confidence was at her ankles. Every second she lingered was another Godwin languished as that thing, that abomination, that vengeful wraith that wanted to take the world and destroy her utterly. She had to deal with him, she must, and she must do it alone. Panic gave her strength and she bucked, kicking her way free. I cannot lose you, too. You won't. She would. She absolutely would. She always lost everything. And so it was that she gathered up her mana and struck again. Another spell blasted him with her dark moon. He strode through her spellfire, never once missing a step despite the frost creeping up his limbs. His left hand caught one of hers, and her right hand his. She still had 2 arms by which to cast, but those were very much distracted when he dipped his head down and at her. Her brain fizzled for a moment until she rallied and drew back. You cannot simply. Another. Her will faltered. She felt his lips smile against hers. Can't what? A third. Her burned. You are distracting me. He hummed happily. Is it working? It was. Deliciously so. Desire began to dull her panic. Maybe she was overreacting. Her body burned for his, maddeningly distracted. She found 2 of her hands shifting to his hips, the other 2 she tugged free and linked behind his head. Any other day she would have jumped him, locked her legs around his waist, then demanded he push her up against the nearest wall and ravage her until she was satisfied. Godwin's words soured even that happy thought. Damn him, you do not understand. She pressed her head to his, hiding beneath her hat. The things I've done, I've killed my own kin. I cannot be forgiven. Tell me and I'll listen. When she made to protest, shifted his grip to her shoulders and gave her a firm shake. I swore I'd help you and that hasn't changed. It never going to change. You hear me no matter what you do or say. I'm here. His words pierced her here, sharper than any blade. Ranni sniffled and immediately cursed herself for it. She wouldn't weep. She mustn't cry. No, she refused to cry. She was Ranni the witch, and she was made of sterner stuff than this. She had a heart of steel, and she was absolutely not going to start bawling her eyes out in a moment of weakness, no matter how much she might want to. Warm arms closed around her, not to hurt or to harm, both of which would have been well within Naruto's right, but only to hold her close. He tucked her head into his and didn't say a word, only offered the simple warmth and comfort of one soul comforting another. It was too much for her tattered heart to bear. Her eyes began to sting. She served the moon and the stars, yes, but he really was the sun, wasn't he her son? Bright and cheery and indomitable, ever shining bright, refusing to be broken. She warbled once and broke. Damn you. All semblance of control abandoned her at last as she bawled into his. She wept and wailed, clinging to him with all 4 hands. Her tongue betrayed her and the words flowed forth. I killed him. No, I did worse than kill Godin. I slew his soul, but his flesh remained. In doing he's become a monster, an abomination, something beyond life and death, and now he's coming for me. He patted her head. Anything can die. Not him. Do you see now? She looked up at him, good eye glistening. You shouldn't love me. I'm a foul and rotten witch. I caused this. I did all this. It's all my fault. Her breath hitched in her throat and she looked away, ashamed. I even made a dark deal with that monster Mohg in exchange for the whereabouts of the 2 fingers I seek to slay. I've since decided to renege on that bargain, but... Naruto pressed a finger to her lips and tilted his head. And this changes my feelings. How, exactly? She sputtered indignantly, aghast at his stubbornness. I'm a monster. His expression didn't waver. Even so, that doesn't change things. Of all the Ranni growled at him. But why? Another, long and lingering. She found herself melting into it. And then he shattered her with 4 little words. Because I love you. She loved him too, blast it all. She knew she couldn't live without him. She wanted to have lots of little blue children with him. Oh gods, it broke her even more. She hadn't thought she had any more tears left in her after that last outburst. How wrong she was. She cried as she hadn't since she was a little girl, since father had first left mother, since everything fell apart. And still Naruto held her. Her was her son, the life in her life, and she couldn't bear to lose him as she'd lost so many others. She cried until her new body finally failed her, until her tears ran dry, until her sorrow slipped through her many fingers. Naruto held her close until she finally cried herself to sleep. Out cold, is she? Naruto eased the door shut behind him. Blade was waiting in the hall, face carved from stone. She is. Good. The shadow bobbed his head. If anyone deserves their rest, it's her. The whole castle heard your fight. Radahn and Rykard would have come running if it weren't for Ranni. He trailed off in a question, seeing his own expression. That's a frightful look you've got there, friend. What are you going to do? He told him. The half-wolf sighed. Naruto, no. Naruto, yes. He marched past, forcing the woven shadow to hasten after him or be left behind. I left Ranni a note, and that bastard made her cry. Nobody makes my wife cry. He received a lupine grin in return. Wife, is she? I wasn't aware the two of you had exchanged vows. Heat speared through his face, sharp and embarrassing. It was a slip of the tongue. I have no idea what you mean. HMHMMHMM. Blade hummed, not believing him for a moment. You're sure you can do this? Then this seems a grand task, even for you. Naruto smiled at him. It was not a nice smile. You underestimate my power. How long have you been waiting to use that line? A while. All right, let me have this. Death. He was Death, the destroyer of worlds. Once upon a time, Godwin had despaired of such a title, of what he had become. Shortly after his own death, in fact. But although his soul had surely perished, his body lived on, and flesh held a life of its own. The Black Knives had done their work well, as has Ranni, his treacherous half-sister. No doubt they'd meant for him to die and be forgotten. And yet by some dint of dark luck he had lingered on, even in this twisted, corrupted form. It had been difficult, at first. How he had screamed trapped in this prison, how he had wailed in the silence, with none but the roots of the Erd-tree to hear. But in silence came understanding. In an understanding, he sought vengeance. This world and the next, and all that came after, all would be his. He had spent many years weaving his way into the lands between, expanding his influence wherever he could. In time, he had gathered followed. Not many, but enough to serve his purposes. Death had only made him all the stronger. When the time came, he would rise again as the prince of this world. Thea and Fortisax would protect him until the moment of his ascension, a moment fast approaching. Perhaps he would even wear Ranni's new body as his own once he arose. It was the least that Harlot deserved. After all, this rotten vessel was only a stopgap, something meant to fall apart before he took his rightful place as Elden Lord. Thump. What was that? Thump, thump. Such a strange noise. Thump, thump, thump. Godwin looked up at the earthen ceiling above with a swollen eye. The noise had ceased. Strange. Perhaps he had been mistaken. Such tremors were commonplace nowadays in any case. Doubtless it was merely another ulcerated tree spirit burrowing high above. Still, it would not do for the cavern to collapse on him. He was vulnerable in his current state, nearly immobile due to his sheer bloated size. Even if he weren't, his legs had long since fused into fins, so he could hardly stand now, could he? Yet another thing to look forward to once he shattered Ranni's spirit and claimed her body. The world above him shattered as a screaming monstrosity came barreling through, shattering the roots of the Erd-tree as it went. The giant fox screamed down at him from the ceiling, all gilded black and gold, nine tails lashing wildly as it howled its fury. He had less than an instant to comprehend it, then it was done burrowing and free to crash down before him. And in its glowing stood a man. Golden claws latched onto his misshapen shoulders and held tight. You must be God. When he yanked him closer. I've heard awful things about you. Let's have a chat. So her consort had hunted him down earlier than expected. No matter. Who are you to come into my home? Let's answer your question with another question. Her consort glared at him. Were you the voice in my head, earlier the one that tried to turn me against Ranni? Godwin blinked a bloated eye. No. He had focused firmly on his so-called sister, seeking to break her, and no other. That drew a scroll from his attacker. Yes, that's still a mystery for another day. Nevertheless, your mistress is evil. He could still salvage this. She keeps secrets from you, terrible things you know not of. Join me, serve me, and I can promise you entire worlds. Nope. Godwin reared back. I beg your pardon. Means no. Naruto smacked his lips, producing an audible pop. She already told me everything. You say she's evil, maybe so. Then I guess that makes me evil too. A Cheshire grin was his reward. I love her. You hurt her. Heck, you want to keep hurting her. You don't even want to give her a chance to change. There's only one way this ends, and it ain't gonna be with words. So be it. A dark shadow fell over him. The corrupted Fortisax landed on his back a heartbeat later, scales ruined by death, but still serving him despite it. Godwin hoped he would at least distract the fox. No such luck. The golden beast looked away from him, true, but its grip never once wavered on him. Something rumbled deep in it as it snarled back at the undead lich dragon. It wasn't the boy's voice. Go away, lizard. 9 tails snapped out and caught Fortisax, tearing him away and bringing him close. Too close. Kurama reared back, caught the dragon's neck in those mighty jaws, and twisted his entire body savagely side to side, sawing at what remained of his skull with vicious dispatch. Off came the head of Fortisax. His body wad discarded in summary fashion, left to slump at their feet. Almost immediately, it began to crumble, death staved off too long. Thea cried out in base horror underfoot, but didn't even have a chance to cast an incantation. A giant golden claw smashed down on her and she was no more. All this transpired in an instant, his 2 dearest allies slain like so much chaff. Fiend, you think you're the final act, but you ain't. Those clawed hands seized hold of Godwin's skull, biting into his fly-smothered flesh. You're not even close. No, that's gonna be her old man and the Offa Queen who started this mess in the first place. I've got a few words for Radahn. He raised his fists. They're called left and right. As for you, those giant golden hands shifted on him, locking around his distended waist. Panic bloomed in Godwin's, the first spark of fear he'd felt since the night of the black knives. You cannot kill me. Laughter filled the cavern. Who said anything about killing you? I won't be doing any of that. Something else will. Godwin snarled and cast a curse on him, blasting him with a black miasma of corrupted spirits. Kurama's golden face burst through them with a sneer. That tickled. No, little prince. The fox leaned forward, jaws gaping wide. I've met the god of death himself. You're nothing compared to him. You're not even a pale shade. You won't forgive Ranni. Naruto shrugged his shoulders, safe and secure within the beasts. That's justified. I get that. But I can't let you hurt her. And so I'm stopping you. Both man and beast leaped upward, tearing Godwin's bulbous body free from the roots as they went. The world lurched painfully. Sunlight stung at his misshapen face and the Prince of Death raised a trembling bony arm to ward it off. Horror gave way to realization, then awe, followed by awe again as he recognized his surroundings. His captor had smashed his way to the surface, tearing a massive hole in Lingrave as he went. That should not be possible. Monster. What in blazes was he? No mere consort was this. Only a god or a demigod could possibly inflict such wanton destruction. Was he also Ea? Maybe he was. And if he was so, dear, I've blundered. He clawed at him furiously, ripping at Kurama's back to strike the blonde within. No avail. He took the attack with barely a grunt. Naruto raised a hand, hoisting him up. This world is too dark and too ugly with you in it. Go away, Godwin. Kurama whirled and flung him into the air. Not sideways, but upward, into the very clouds. Godwin realized his intent a moment later. Fool, did he really think he could throw him into space? He would return, devour the outer gods beyond the stars, and come for vengeance, then wreak a havoc. Hold on, why do I see a light? A feral roar rattled the world below him. Walk towards it. The words were still reverberating in Godwin's ears when a massive sphere of dark energy struck him in the rancid and propelled him higher into the sky. If there had been pain before, this was agony. He could not push it away, could not retaliate. It took all his strength just to hold it back. Events progressed rapidly after that. All around him, the world went warm, then cold, now warm again as he broke through the atmosphere. He could scarcely see past the scalding black sphere that struck him, but he could see the world, the planet, shrinking rapidly into the distance as he fell into the uncaring void of space. All the while he seethed. This was not the end. He refused to let this be the end. Why did he feel warm again? Godwin could not turn his head as such, but he could still feel. And it was growing terribly hot. That made little sense. Space was mean to be cold. The stars themselves were distant and held no warmth, so why? An eye swiveled, boiling in the darkness of the stars. And through his bleary, bleeding vision, he saw. The sun itself loomed large behind him, growing larger with each passing moment, standing in silent judgment. The massive attack pressing against his hadn't detonated yet. Oh no, it only kept pushing him further and further on Tylo. That foxy bastard. So that was his intention. Though I am Godwin the Golden Prinky of Death, I cannot be killed. But the sun was a force unto itself, a god all its own. It judged all, great and small, and he was hurtling toward it, with nothing to stop him, and no way to stop himself. Already it dominated his vision, swelling before him with searing promise. His life flashed before his eyes in an instant. There was nothing he could do, say, or even offer in his defense. Soon enough, he could barely think at all, for the very flesh sloughed from his bones. All he knew was heat, pain, suffering, torment. His last thoughts were of honeyed rays of gold. Godwin's vision burst into light. Fire consumed him. Naruto squinted up into the blazing orb in the sky and lowered his hands with a heavy sigh. He was a satisfied one all the same. His eyes stung and his heaved, dribbled from his back where Godwin had clawed at him, but he'd done it. There, see how he likes that. It had taken more chakra than he would have liked to blast Godwin away, and more still to make certain the Baijudama pushed rather than exploded. But at least the threat was dealt with. After all, Godwin was only Prince of Death here in the lands between, on this world. It stood to reason then that he wouldn't be if he wasn't on said world. It was a gamble, all right, a risky one, but it was the only thing he could think of. He couldn't wait to see the look on Ranni's face when he got back. He felt the moment the Prince of Death expired. Nothing could stand against the sun. Not even him. Satisfied, he dropped his chakra cloak and alighted nimbly upon the ground. That really had taken a lot out of him. Wasn't every day he grappled with a dead demigod, you know. Something slapped his back. He sighed. Come on, blade. Did you really follow me? His vision lurched to one side. How that wasn't right. Naruto looked down, frowned him now. There was a trident in his. 3 awful spikes jutted through his lungs and hard to skewer him, through and through. His eyes widened as he touched a trembling hand to one of the metal protrusions. How had someone attacked him from behind when he wasn't looking? He hadn't even sensed the attack coming. There wasn't even a single spark of ill intent, so who? Low laughter rumbled behind him. You have my thanks, a rough voice intoned at his flank. He would have been quite the nuisance to my dynasty. Naruto looked back, not quite comprehending. A massive weapon had indeed struck his back. He knew that already. What came next utterly baffled him. Clutched in gnarled fingers attached to arm even now emerging from a pool of at his feet, the rest of his owner even now emerged as he looked on. A twisted horned man clad in ornate robes of dark blue rimmed with gold and red, he was as ghastly as hideous. One of those horns had even worked its way into an eye, leaving a single gold iris to stare back at him balefully. I really must thank Godwin. His attacker tittered merrily. How kind of him to wound you and make this easier for me. What the hell? Why you of all people ask me that? His wood killer leered down at him, fangs twisted in a sneer. You and your witch could have been a part of something greater, something grand. Instead she chose to betray me, to use me. This is how I repay betrayal. He twisted the trident in. I would have left you be, but now you shall suffer for the betrayal of your mistress. He coughed. Buddy, I don't even know who you are. You don't? That lone eye stared back at him within it that wizened horned face. We've never met, but you may know me as Mohg. A pleasure to make your acquaintance. Can't say the same. The omen tutted at him. You may be powerful, but you are bound by, just like any living thing. And in the formless mother reigns supreme. Naruto raised a trembling hand. A raisin sure I can sparked in it. Mohg tutted. I think not. His boiled in his veins, shattering his concentration. The jutsu guttered out harmlessly in his grasp. Worry not, your allies will join you soon enough, once your witch has given me that which is rightfully mine. A raspy chuckle pervaded the air between them. How furious she will be once she learns the baleful shadows ambushed her beloved. His voice lowered to a throaty whispers. She will tear everything apart, just as planned. Her rage toward the fingers will reach new heights, and as we both know, anger makes one sloppy. Ranni had to do something. Had to warn her. His hand snapped up. A golden flare of light shot into the sky. Please, let someone see it. Mohg scoffed, observing the firework lazily. And what, pray tell, did you hope to accomplish with that? Naruto tried to speak, but for the first time in years his voice failed him. Bubbled up between his lips as he laughed. Just hold on. Kurama sounded downright frantic, which only frightened him all the more. I can fix this. I know I can, just give me a little time. Mohg didn't. Long live the king. With another awful cackle, the omen panted a hand between his shoulder blades and shoved him forward, tearing out the trident as he went, leaving 3 terrible tears behind in his torso. Pain gave him strength, if only for a moment. He swung backward blindly as he fell in and smashed a fist into the monster's face, driving clenched knuckles against the horn thrust through Mohg's eye. An awful sickening squelch reached his ears, and with it, the power binding his fell away for a moment. It was enough. Fool Morgoth's brother recoiled, clutching at his face. This changes nothing, fall and die. Screaming, the omen lunged forward and backhanded him with his trident, causing him to tumble backward at the edge of the crater he'd created earlier. He teetered at the edge for a moment, tried to hold on, lost his balance, then fell into the very hole he'd torn from the earth. Gravity sank its claws into him as it would any other. Down he went. Wind lashed at his face, stinging his eyes. So tired. Had to keep his eyes open. If he fell asleep here, he might not wake up again. Mustn't pass out, mustn't, so sleepy. The earth rushed up to greet him like an old friend. It seemed so close, no, so very close. Consciousness finally slipped through his faltering fingers. Naruto's control slipped and his mind faltered. Darkness swam in. Naruto was cold, colder than ice, and barely breathing. Death had sank its cruel claws into him with each passing moment he drifted further from. Ranni didn't know what to do. She prided herself on knowing most everything, and she knew much, but she simply didn't know what to do. There he lay, sprawled out on the cot before her, much of his stomach swathed in wide bandages. Even his shot eyes had been bandaged, to better help them heal. Were it not for the faint rise and fall of the former, she would have thought him dead. Rykard had seen his flare and brought him home post-haste, but the damage was done. He was already fighting at least 3 infections, 1 for each hole in his body, and running a dangerous fever. His body appeared to be laboring under a curse of sort, one in his very. Whatever it was, it had weakened his healing factor for the moment, forcing him to heal as most mortals did. Slowly, rage curled in her like a gnarled old root, twisting inward, choking her every thought. He was hers, as she was his. He belonged to her, and she, him. They could not be parted. And yet someone had tried, someone had the audacity, the gall to attack when his back was turned to do this to him. She could think of very few individuals capable of such. Her first thought was the baleful shadows. The 2 fingers were spiteful creatures, and she could see them sending air assassins after those she cherished. There were other demigods, of course, who could have done the deed. Melania was powerful enough to catch one unawares, though none had seen her or Miquella for centuries. Morgoth might, via his projections. And of course there was Mohg, but surely he wasn't so unfathomably stupid as to rouse her wrath so soon after their meeting. Then again, she'd intended to renege upon her promise to give him the finger-slaying blade once she was finished with it, so anything was possible. In the end, it didn't matter who had done. Their fates would be the same. 201. I will rain down every agony upon them. Her hands, all four of them, clenched into fists at her sides as she stared at her lover's still body. Every violation imaginable, every pain, every torment. Her words were not just for him but for herself as well, for whomever had done this to him. Those who hurt you will know agony glimpsed only in myth, horror seen only in nightmares. A muscle jumped in her jaw and she grit her teeth. I shall parade their broken bodies from every corner of the lands between. Her voice rose higher, peaking in a furious cry, and make their souls pray for death. That is my promise to you. She trembled and knelt before him. Just please. Her voice broke as she conjured a weapon to her hands. Hold on, wife, I beg of thee. She laid the dark moon greatsword at his bedside, and fiddled with the ring in her pocket, longing to slip it onto his finger, but unable to for fear that doing so might disrupt the oh-so-delicate lattice of mother's healing spells and kill him. Rest and recover, and I swear to thee I will give you all that I am and more. I will say the words I should have said so long ago. Her hands curled around his, pale and cold. The lack of warmth terrified her. Even so, she pressed her forehead to the back of his knuckles, exhaled softly, and ate him on the lips. No response. Of course not. This wasn't a fairy tale. True love was an illusion, nothing more. She stood slowly, marshalling the tattered threads of her thoughts. You must abide alone a while, my dear consort eternal. She breathed out and turned away from him, hardening her heart. I shall find the one who did this to you, I swear. Don't. That she imagined it just now. A wet cough had her spinning around. Naruto. He made a weak, mewling noise. Rapt eyes stared blankly at the ceiling. Is that you? Ranni can't see. She tore the bandages off his eyes, shot though they were. Those bleary blue orbs focused on her all the same. He granted a weak, wry smile. A trembling breath fled from her lips and she nearly embraced him, only to remember his wounds at the last. Touching his seemed an ill-advised idea at the moment, even for a mistress of magic such as she. It didn't stop her from him. Her lips met his hungrily, desperately, frantic to have him. He returned her affections and her heart soared. She would have liked nothing more than to mount him in that moment, but she mustn't. With an effort, she forced herself to release him. 4 hands ran frantically over his fave and he leaned into each one. I'm so glad you survived. More or less. His visage was pale. She could see the veins pulsing in his visage. Bastard got my heart. It's healed, but I'm gonna need some time to recover. Oh, her face fell, crestfallen. Rage returned in its absence. All the more reason for me to hunt them down and flay them alive. Wait. He grabbed at one of her wrists. His grip was so weak that she was given paused. Ranni, I know you're angry, but don't do anything stupid. She rounded on him with a hiss. You speak to me of foolishness, you, who ran headlong into the enemy's trap without though or backup. Didn't know it was a trap. He coughed a bit of, stirring her guilt. And besides, Godwin made you cry. Couldn't let that slide. Her heart performed a silly little fluttering flip in her. Who did this to you? Tell me and tell me true. His eyes met hers, knowing what she wanted. If I do, you're gonna go after them. I am. Scrying their location is well within my power. He heaved a sigh. They'll hurt you. She flinched, stung. Do you really think me so weak? No, I just don't want them to kill you. She laid her hands on his. Trust in me, as I've trusted in you. A small part of her wondered if he would. Naruto could be just as stubborn as she when he wanted to be. Another reason they were made for one another. She saw the ghost of indecision flit across his face, chastised by anger as much as concern. He knew she'd find out one way or another. In the end, his emotions finally won out. Mohg. He groaned out. He said his name was Mohg. Aha, the culprit was caught. She had her name and her target. Grim satisfaction swelled within her. So this treacherous little worm is to blame for thy wounds. I shall repay him in kind. He uses a boiling curse, that's how he got me. And I didn't sense him. Ranni huffed and made to stand. Your warning is appreciated. He shan't catch me off guard. No, he grabbed at her again, his grip strengthened by desperation. You don't understand. Sensing is my thing. It's what I do. I should have noticed him. I was exhausted, yeah, but I was alert. Either I've gotten sloppy or he's using a talisman of some sort to conceal his presence. Be careful. I shall. She laid a hand on his shoulder and graced him with a long, lingering. And you shall lay here. Rest now. Recover her strength. Naruto tried to rise, willful as ever. Ranni, don't you Ranni me. She fed his forehead with one hand and pushed him back down with another. Finish that sentence and I shall be very cross with you. Her heart softened at the pained expression he wore. However, what you did for me was very kind. A fit of lust seized her and her smile grew coy. Very brave, I dare say. For that, you deserve a reward. I really don't need a. Ranni climbed atop him, straddling his hips with infinite care. From there she unlaced his trousers, simultaneously divesting herself of her robes as she did. The cool air tickled her skin but nowhere near as much as the tiny gasp Naruto gave. Good. She'd surprised him, shocked him even, with her boldness. She couldn't help but preen a little at that. The fact that she got such a reaction out of him all spoke highly of his feelings for her. She planted herself firmly in his lap with intent and smiled down at him beneath the brim of her hat. His breathing quickened a little, eyes flitted up to her bare bosom, lingering on her swaying S before traveling back to her face. How are we going to? She carefully planted her hands on either side of the bed, like a spider gently entrapping him in her web. Very slowly and very carefully. Her lips quirked in a smile. Let me do the work. Slowly, deliberately, she began to grind her hips against him. Naruto did not protest after that. Ranallah heard a sudden gasp and paused, just shy of knocking on her dear daughter's door. Then she heard the noises within. On a whim, she pressed her ear to the wooden frame. Her eyes widened. What a commotion! She heard such a dirty daughter she had. It seemed several grandchildren would be well on the way after all. Why, it almost made her jealous, it did. Ah, young love. Humming softly, she turned and sashayed away. Morgoth's brother wasn't hard to find. Ranni had known of Mohg's palace for quite some time now. Indeed, she considered it a point of pride to know what her kin were up to any given moment. She'd ignored Mohg because he hadn't been a threat to her. His dear dynasty would be invalidated upon the moment of her ascension, when she took Marika's power and departed for the stars. There would be nothing for him to rule over then. Her impending departure was something she dearly needed to address with Naruto post-haste, and she would honestly cross her new heart and hope to die. Once this deed was done, Mohg was exactly where she knew he'd be guarding his precious Miquella. It was no small feat to reach him indeed. Blade nearly blunted his weapon, cutting through all the enemies on their way to the top, but once she did, she tasked her shadow to guarding the entrance. He stood guard with but a nod, leaving her to venture forth on her own. For you see, this was a battle she must face alone, if only to prove herself. Rykard and Radahn had been all too eager to join and help her avenge the attack on Naruto, but she'd talked them round. You see, they were too kind. Mother was as well. They would simply kill Mohg and consider that sufficient. A quick death is too good for him. Hence, kindness. Today, she did not want to be kind. His punishment must be more severe. She had an inkling of what that punishment must be, but first. Mohg. He didn't try to flee. There he stood before his egg, grinning like a loon without a care in the world. So the jig is up, is it? He turned to face her with a merry grin, trident in hand. A pity. I would have liked a bit more time to prepare. One shoulder rolled in a bony shrug, utterly unbothered by her rage, indifferent, even. But no matter. I have what I need. Fresh laughter tumbled past his fanged teeth. You are too late, little Ranni. As sneaking suspicions overtook her. What hast thou done? What was necessary? His lone eye gleamed with a crazed light. Your beloved was precisely what I needed. The perfect catalyst. For what? She had a sinking suspicion she already knew. Mohg rounded on his egg with a flourish. For my dearest Miquella's awakening, of course. The long attenuated arm behind him twisted with a sickening crack, shrunk now, and was summarily sucked back into the cocoon before her very eyes. An eerie red light swelled within its confines, blindingly bright. Ranni raised an arm to ward the worst of it off and muttered a quick spell under her breath. Mana gathered in her 3 remaining hands, hidden behind her back. Arise, my beloved. Mohg raised his arms in benediction, ignorant to the danger. Arise, and together we shall take the world. His voice rose further in a language she didn't recognize, the words of which her head ached and darkened the very air around them, turning it hard and cold. Whatever he was making, whatever he was summoning, she wanted no part of it. Enough. Ranni flung her hands forward, and 3 dark moons with them to interrupt his incantation. The first struck Mohg in the and sent him sprawling. The second went wide, smashing into a pillar. The third struck straight and true, smashing into Miquella's egg, cocoon head on. At once the light dimmed. A thin, plaintive wail echoed within its dark depths as the entity inside shrieked horribly. A thick film of frost crept across its veiny surface, and the light dimmed, fading into ethereal fog to shroud their vision. Mohg scrambled forward into the mist on his hands and knees, more a beast than man in that moment. You witch, what have you done? Ranni could have struck him down then while he was distracted. She chose not to. Instead she looked on, content to crush whatever came shambling out of that cocoon. That would break Mohg's spirits once and for all, surely. She had but to wait. Her patience was well rewarded. Mohg grasped at something in the fog. Aha, there you are, dearest Miquella, I am so pleased to see thee. His voice cut off in baffled squawk. She soon saw why, as she looked on. The fog cleared, revealing a cocoon cracked open, and within an infant. Mohg croaked in sheer disbelief. Him, Miquella. A little blond boy of perhaps 6 months lay curled in on himself amidst a bundle of white robes, sleeping fitfully. This is your precious consort, Ranni snorted in disbelief, unable to contain her mirth. A babe not even past his first name day, brother, I had though you a lech, but clearly thou art more depraved than I thought. Mohg twitched, shoulders quivering with rage. Stop. She couldn't help herself. She laughed at this failure, long and loud, as she hadn't in years. Stop that now. She kept laughing. Stop laughing at me, Ranni. A wave of burning lashed at her face. Ranni marshaled her magic, froze it solid, and shattered it. Mohg came barreling through the ice, swinging his trident with one hand. Amateur, all strength and no grace. She tumbled nimbly under the sweep and drove her staff into the back of his left leg, causing the limb to buckle. A wave of coldest glintstone staggered him, and she took full advantage, punching a fist through his massive before flinging him onto his back. Swordplay and strength had never been her forte. She was a sorceress through and through, but she knew she was also an Empyrean, knew she near a goddess now, and knew she was stronger than him. For the first time, she let a cold, cruel smile pluck at her face. How does it feel, Mohg, to be deconstructed, to be the victim? This can still work. Miquella is mine, and mine alone. My dynasty shall reign supreme. He gurgled wetly as her staff struck his chin, forcing his mouth shut with a harsh C. Ranni walked past him, tutting softly. It matters not if you have the blessing of your so-called formless mother. You cannot manipulate my if you do not shed it. The sorceress spellblade fed out, severing one of his horns. She caught in the hair and flung it like a dagger into his knee. Mohg toppled back with a yowl. But I can shed yours. Her half-brother swung at her again, all strength with no substance. Slow. She smacked his arm aside with her staff and blasted him away toward the exit. A fresh cantrip on her part sealed it, ensuring he couldn't escape to fight another day. Mohg must have sensed it because he went wild. No, he thrashed upright, half-grazed. This isn't over. His trident speared the air, wounding the sky to dye the world red. I'll make you pay. By all means, try. She steeped two of her hands together. But you'll not succeed with that paltry power of yours. Mohg stabbed upward again. Trez. Rings have encircled her body. Ranni tilted her head and poked one with a finger. Curious. Duo. A quick tap of her staff erected a blue bubble around her body. UNUS. Mohg's final incan rang with finality. He thrust his trident upward with renewed intensity. Nile, he cried. The rings have bit into her spell shield, cracking it, but doing her no harm. Nile. Another fracture etched itself into her barrier. She grit her teeth. Nihil. On the third and final cry, her barrier shattered, taking the Y rings with it. Black feathery wings burst from Mohg's back, bathing her in their towering shadows. Do you see now? He lurched into the sky with a maddened cackle. Behold the power of the formless Motherak. A searing blast of blue light sheared a hole through Mohg's right wing, scattering Y feathers. Bereft of balance, he was sent tumbling to the floor. He tried to land. Tried, being the operative word. All he managed was a graceless crash that sent him spiraling into the ground, tearing through several tombstones. Ranni tutted and gestured toward one of the stone pillars. The F of her wrist brought it down on his back, mangling the other wing and drawing a fresh cry of pain from him. All I see is a fool who is going to suffer. Deprived of his aerial advantage though he was, her wretched half-brother still fought on. She met him in kind, brandishing her staff like a blade. His trident swept it and she smacked it away as one might a harmless stick. The very act broke his poise and staggered him. Her fist slammed through his, tearing another hole in his torso before hurling him backwards once more. Still he wouldn't fall and climbed to his feet anew. It seemed physical blows alone wouldn't suffice after all. She'd seen Naruto use those jutsu of his before. Perhaps it was time she tried something similar. After all, anything he did, she could do, surely. Banishing her staff, she raised all four of her hands. In each palm, she conjured a dark moon, a terrible sphere of purest ice. They grew larger, largest as she fed them with her limitless power. Mohg realized what she intended and tried to backpedal, then shielded himself with his mangled wings when it became clear he wouldn't escape. She let them fly, bombarding him with one frozen moon after the other. His wings never stood a chance. She blasted them clean off, leaving little more than wretched stumps sprouting from his shoulders. You are strong, 'tis true. Her voice rose over his groans as he struggled to free himself from her ice. But you made one fatal mistake. She started forward then, parried a desperate lunge of his trident before it could even think to reach her, then ran him through once more for good measure. He tried to take away what was mine. The words escaped her in an icy hiss as she leered up at him. My chosen, my dear consort eternal. You may be a demigod, but I, you wretched little shit, am an Empyrean. Her lips brushed his ear. And you, Mohg, are nothing. He screamed and lashed another curse lashed out at her. Childish, she slapped his spell aside and kicked out his wounded leg, sending him sprawling. You may be older than me, but you are stagnant. She caught his trident, snapped it in half, then thrust it into his stomach before kicking him down onto his back again. She stalked after him slowly, savoring the moment as he actually tried to crawl away. I am a mistress of magic and you, an impudent oaf playing with. I have conjured curses you cannot fathom, spells that will sizzle your very soul. I've never had the chance to use them in combat before, truth be told, I didn't want to. He may think less of me for using these, but I promise to return to him. And besides, the corner of her mouth curled up just so. You're weak. Mohg ripped his broken trident from his torso and rushed her in a berserk rage, hands flailing for her throat. Ranni took a deep breath, and then, her voice rang with power. Prostrate yourself. Mohg crashed down just short of her with an agonized gasp. Interesting. Gravity magic worked well with the power of compulsions. Perhaps, be blinded. His good eye clouded over and he flailed at her madly, unable to see. Ranni circled him, considering, and unleashed another of her blackest arts. Pain. Mohg crumpled to his knees, quivering in agony. Not enough 100 knives cut your wretched flesh. Wounds burst across his body, weakening him yet further with loss. She intoned incantations one after another, each more terrible than the last, inflicting horrors upon him that would never see the light of day. By the end of it, he was a groaning, lacerated mess on the floor. And when that grew boring, she restored his vision, reached down and cupped his chin. Do you understand now, Mohg? This is the woman I was before we met, the wicked witch who orated the Night of Black Knives. Her fingers dug into his chin, drawing a fresh cry from him. Someone who would do whatever they deemed necessary to achieve their goals, no matter the cost. I swore long ago that I would never to become this person again, never let her out to play, as it were. But for you, I'm willing to break that vow. Your death will not be slow. He raised a hand to ward her off. Please, mercy. She leaned back, considering him with one eye. There is no mercy. An awful thought occurred to her, then. Your formless mother likes wounds, does she? Well, she took a deep breath, flooding her lungs with cold air. It centered her, much like the icy rage that currently consumed her. Does she happen to know what temperature freezes at? Mohg whimpered. No. Ranni's smile gained an edge. Let's find out. His right arm shattered into white glass. He reeled back, clutching at it. Why? Because you see, I am cold, Mohg. She tapped her staff and the air grew colder still. My heart has only ever truly warmed for one another outside my family. And you hurt him. She cupped his cheek. Do you know what I promised my beloved, Mohg? He tried to speak. She pinched his mouth shut. I will rain down every agony upon you. She gripped Horned Head Face with all four of her hands, slowly crushing his skull within them. Every violation imaginable, every pain, every torment. She watched his good eye grow wide with horror. You will know agony glimpsed only in myth, horror seen only in nightmares. I will parade your broken body from every corner of the lands between, and make your soul pray for death. That is my promise to you, and it begins now. Mohg did not die well. In truth, it took the Lord of the better part of a day to expire, a testament to his heritage and vitality, but expire he did. When the deed was finally done and her vengeance satisfied, she cast the ruined remains of his corpse aside and snatched up his great rune. With him dead, the curse assailing Naruto should abate. This she would keep as a trophy, with his head besides. A faint noise behind her claimed her attention. Ah, yes, she'd nearly forgotten. One last loose end to tie up before she returned. Padding across the Y mausoleum, Ranni paused before Miquella's infantile form. The boy was awake now, looking about himself owlishly. Her wrath did not include him. He was as much a victim of Mohg's machination as Naruto was. And besides, his curse had regressed him to a mere babe. How could you be angry at a baby they didn't know any better? She felt no anger toward him, only confusion. Now what to do with thee? The babe sniffed softly. Ranni balked, eye widening in sudden concern. She was covered in and still wearing her hat. She must look a sight. No, no, no. Please don't. Miquella must still have his mind, surely. Surely he would not. He absolutely would. Little Miquella's face crumpled and he threw his head back in a piercing wail. Maternal instinct took flight in her heart. She'd dealt with this before. With a long-suffering sigh, she scooped the babe up into her arms. Humming softly, she began to rock him to and fro. Hush, little baby, don't say a word. Is that a kid? Yes, it is, Naruto. Ranni felt it was a simple enough statement. Alas, she once again underestimated her dear consort eternal. Naruto propped himself in bed. His wounds from Mohg looked to have healed, and she saw no lingering sign of the fiend's white curse about her beloved. Sat up now, gave the infant Miquella, nestled against her one long lingering look, and said the first thing that came to his mind. Is it our kid? Fire. In an instant Ranni's face was full of heat and her cheeks were burning. It is not. She clutched her little half-brother closer regardless. Why would you even think such a thing? He shrugged on shoulder. I mean, you were gone for a bit after Wayuno and you came back with a blonde baby. What am I supposed to think? Stars above, she loved her consort, but he truly wound her up as no one else did. Not this. 'Tis poor Miquella, not a child. Ranni, that is a baby. A muscle jumped in her jaw. Beloved, I have 3 free hands and I will happily use them to throttle thee. Did someone mention a child? Ranala swept into the room in a swirl of silk, only to pause as she laid eye on the fussy baby in her arms. Oh my goodness, what a darling little boy. Give him here at once, quick as can be. She swept past her in short order. Little Miquella found himself swept up out of her arms, into her mother's. Resistance was futile. Never fear, she crooned down at the baffled babe, rocking him to and fro. Oh, I'm here. Come, let's get you something warm to wear. Oh, Naruto watched her whisk away with a wistful sigh and red cheeks. I didn't even get to hold him. Ranni poked his cheek. Do not make such an expression. Our first child shall be a girl. He sputtered a bit at that, but she could see the faint hint of longing in his eyes, one she silently reciprocated. Against all odds, she'd found the one man who actually wanted to be a father. How quaint. She wouldn't deny that it had been rather pleasant holding a child. It almost made her long for another. To hold a little blue child of her own in her arms, to nurture a life that belonged to her and her alone. Yes, she could see the appeal in all its glory now, and it spoke to her, demanding fulfillment. Little blue children indeed. Say, a wistful expression crossed Naruto's whiskered face. Do you think you're... Now it was her turn to flush. 'Tis much too soon to know. His grin grew. Maybe now, but in a month. Ranni yanked her head down over her head to hide her furious flush. Cease. Always, come on. He patted her head. Don't sulk. Fine if that was how it would be then. She threw her hat at him. Cease. He kept laughing as she pouted. Rykard called them to counsel some hours later. Do you agree now that we must act? He slammed one hand down against the round table and the massive map sprawled atop it. We are fast running out of enemies, with the Erdtree more vulnerable now than it has ever been. Mohg is dead, Miquella's a Y-infant, and my spies tell me that Godric has been slain since I last checked in on him. That got Radahn's attention, if not necessarily Ranni's. By whom? Their bearded brother shrugged. I do not know. Too many whispers. Regardless, only Morgott and Malenia yet remain. One is Leyndell, the other in the far north. We cannot ignore them any longer. Rann knew where he was going with this. It was almost enough to dampen her mood. Yet the 2 fingers and their baleful shadows remain a threat. To you, dear sister, Rykard chided her gently, but not us. What do you propose? She didn't miss the way Naruto twitched beside her just then. Surely you wouldn't call us here without a plan. Blade muttered under his breath. Blasphemous bastard probably has another one. I suggest we divide and conquer. Rykard pointedly ignored her shadow's critique and drew a finger down the map, tracing that pale digit towards the capital. Split our forces and with them, our objectives. Together, our goals may conflict, but separately, we can achieve our aims. Radahn and I will take the capital while you, his pointer finger trailed back to the location of her rise. You and Naruto will seek out these baleful shadows you so fear with them the two fingers. Find them, end them, and be done with them. From shall reunite in Landel and then see what comes. It was a good plan, a solid plan, but she noticed a flaw nevertheless. Her gaze trailed to the end of the table, where the last remaining member of their family sat. And what of Mother? Ranallah had been quiet throughout their council, quietly rocking dearest Miquella in her arms. Here at last she perked up. I shall remain here with little your half-brother. He's in a delicate state and needs someone to look after him. Naruto hid a smile behind his hand. Ranni saw it and understood her scheme in an instant. Ah, she knew what she was up to. By someone you mean you, don't you? Mother surely Blade can. Let me have this. The sudden emotion in her voice brought her up short. I was a poor mother to thee, but I shall not be to him. This is my redemption. She rocked. I shall see him protected and nurtured until such a time as we find his sister. And if we encounter Melania, Ranallah tutted. When, not if, dear child of mine. I can see your thoughts churning already. Didst thou forget who raised thee? I can see thy schemes plain as day. She made a shooing gesture with her free hand. I may not be sane, but I am quite capable of protecting myself. Radahn chortled softly. She has you there, sister. Rykard brought his hands together. We are agreed, then. All eyes turned to Naruto, who heaved a sigh. Against my better judgment, fine. But we're doing this my way. Rykard granted him a grave nod. So be it. So where are we going, exactly? Ranni glanced over her shoulder at Naruto, the softest of smiles alighting upon her pale lips as she walked. To where we first met. Oh, your tower. He peered through the mist to the rise in the distance, barely visible through the fog. Feels like a lifetime since we were here last. Indeed it does. Had it really been that long, it almost didn't feel real, like they were hurtling toward the end of things. The last time he'd seen those towers, he was only just starting his journey. Now it felt like he'd come full circle, both as a shinobi and a person. The man he'd come was not the same blundering boy who'd first stumbled into Ranni's tower so long ago. He'd found faith, love, happiness in a woman he wanted to spend the rest of his long life with, and damn it all, he wanted to keep her safe no matter the cost. Some might call him a glutton for that. Greedy, even. Was he ready to bring an end to things he didn't feel ready? Far from it. I don't want it to end. The realization humbled him. Not yet. He wanted to show Ranni his world too, you know. But it might not even be possible. That saddened him. It's been a grand adventure, hasn't it? There was something in the way Ranni said those words just now that filled him with unease. To think that we've done so much. He'd only ever heard her take that tone a handful of times, and it never ended well. From here we shall take a lift deep into the bowels of the earth, and then go deeper still. Here at last, a sad, stoic silence pushed itself between the two of them. We're going to have another argument, aren't we? Possibly, she conceded. Suppose it's been a long time coming. She bumped his hip with hers. Do you truly fear nothing? Of course I fear things. He glanced at her out the corner of his eye. I'm just not vocal about them. For instance, did you know I'm afraid of ghosts? Truly, one of her four hands threaded through his, fingertips cupping his own. Yup, I thought you were a ghost the first time I saw you. She sputtered and tripped over her feet. Nonsense. Yes, he laughed over her reply, hoisted her up, and kept walking with her, hand in hand. I completely froze for a second when I laid eyes on you. I nearly turned tail and ran. And he almost had. Really, she'd scared the life out of him at first. It had taken him a great deal of time to even admit that much. The lunar princess made a noise caught between a sigh and a laugh. I am not some spooky spirit. Well, I know that now, but when I first saw you in your doll body, half your soul hanging out. They shared a rueful laugh between the two of them. It couldn't last. Art thou angry with me? Depends. He gripped her hand tight as they reached the rise. Are you going to run off on your own? I was considering Ido, she yelped as he pinched her hip. I said I was, not that I would. You sure about that? He squinted her way. Because I'll tickle you. So no lying. Ranni lifted her chin to glare at him. I am a princess, you would not dare. A blonde brow rose. Naruto, no. We must be serious about this. Must we? He tilted his head. Way I see it, we've been way too wound up since this Mohg mess. And if our journey's almost over, might as well have some fun before everything ends, yeah. Don't you dare. She tried to retreat, but hesitated, unwilling to release his hand. It cost her most dear. He pounced, and in an instant his fingers were across her ribs as a musician might pluck the strings of their lute. She squirmed and thrashed in his grasp, to no avail. It wasn't long before she was giggling nonstop. He loved the sound of her laughter. It was such a rare throaty sound. Hearing it out here in the open made it all the more heady. A man could get drunk on it. On her. For all her protests, she only offered a token resistance, though she could have easily fended him off with her four hands and her spells. She didn't. Instead, she turned in his grasp to face him fully. As a concession, he eased up on the tickling and let her draw in a quick breath. The moment he did, she latched onto him with all four hands, pressing her body tight against his so he couldn't worm his way in and tickle her again. Her gaze met his. Then something changed between the two of them. Without warning, the air grew charged. One of her hands moved to cup his face, another wrapped around his waist, his third began to fiddle with the clasps of his armor, and her fourth went lower, much lower. His own hand subconsciously moved to cradle her waist, thumbs stroking small circles just above her rear. She gasped and forced his hands lower. His eyes widened in return, but he didn't dare let go. "Ranni, 'tis your fault," she growled. "You made me like this. I had forgotten what lust felt like before thee. I never wanted a child before thou came into my life." There was a decidedly glazed look in her eye now that he noticed belatedly. He beheld the faint flush of her cheeks, the rapid pace of her breathing, yes, even the hammering beat of her heart. Oh, maybe he'd pushed her a bit too far after all. He could see a spark in her that hadn't been there prior. He kinda liked it. Maybe he should. "I wish to dance." Dance? Naruto blinked, somewhat taken aback by the sudden request. Where's this coming from? "'Twas not a request." Ranni stepped into him and took his hands in hers, wrapping her remaining limbs around his waist and held tight. "Dance with me at once." Then she turned, presenting her back, him, body pressed flush against his, and began to move. Wait a minute. What kind of dance was this? He wasn't used to just swaying about like this with her, hand in hand, body to body. "I am a princess of Caria." She looked up at him, and belatedly he glimpsed the impish gleam in her gaze as he held her close. "I excel in every subject I choose to learn." The sway of her hips was hypnotic, like watching a moving pendulum in slow motion, to say nothing of the pressure as she pushed against him. "Art thou not entertained, my lord? You're doing this on purpose. Perhaps. Have I slaked thy appetite?" Her grin gained an edge. "No, in that case." His eyes widened, but her smile said it all. "Wuho, take responsibility." She whirled and jumped him with a snarl, driving him to the ground, all but mounting him, hands and legs spread on either side to pin him in place. She grabbed his hands and forced one to her bosom and another to her rear, nearly tearing her robes in her haste to make him touch her once more. It was quite possibly the most aggressive he'd ever seen her during their time together. Neat. He kinda liked it. "You crave a child that badly." Ranni leaned in low, lips brushed his ear as she bit down, marking him as hers once more. "Then we shan't leave this place until I am certain I have conceived." A low growl pervaded the air behind them as their surroundings darkened. "But first, let us deal with this wayward dog that dares disturb us." Pivoting, still sat on his lap, she faced the darkness. "You can stop lurking about, now." A crimson specter manifested itself not a yard away. For a fleeting second he almost thought it was, but no, it wasn't Blade. Its posture was hunched, wild, downright feral, even. It radiated madness and malevolence, a singular desire to rip and rend, to destroy all before it. And above all, it hated. Hate. The sheer intensity of its emotions was enough to make a man retch. In its eyes he saw no kindness, no semblance of sanity, and nothing by which he could bargain. This creature existed only to kill. This, then, was the last of the baleful shadows. Naruto righted himself quickly, but he needn't have. The silent shadow stalked toward them slowly, greatsword in hand. "Right." He heaved a sigh and adopted a stance. "Guess I'm taking this one." "Indeed, you may." Ranni hopped off him. "Do be quick about it. We have urgent matters to attend to." He squinted her way. "Why do I get the feeling your idea of urgent and mine aren't the same?" "I haven't the foggiest idea what you mean, my dear consort eternal." The baleful shadow was upon them a moment later. Its arms rose with a yowl. A blade descended. He stepped aside and let it clang harmlessly into the dirt. The beast barreled forward to bite, only to receive a stinging backhand. He stepped in as it reeled and drove a fist into his armored torso. It recoiled with a pained yelp but fought on, undaunted. It looked like Blade, smelled like Blade, even fought like Blade to a reasonable degree, but this thing, it wasn't Blade. As if the red outline wasn't enough of a giveaway. Whatever it was, it fought like a creature possessed, which it probably was, in hindsight. It knew neither mercy nor subtlety. This was what Blade would have become if he hadn't usurped his connection with the greater will. "Obey." Its will lashed at him like a whip even now, filling his mind with agony. He laughed at it. "Obey us." Fought on, now. "Why won't you obey?" "Because pain's an old friend. And this isn't enough to stop me." It only had power here through its baleful shadow. And once he killed it, its influence would be broken. Ordinarily he would have toyed with it a bit, maybe tried to talk it down, but right now he was feeling so terribly frustrated. So he did what any capable warrior would. Parry. His left hand swept up and diverted his death at the last second, smacking the cold greatsword away like the hulking bar of steel it was. Overbalanced as it was, the baleful shadow couldn't course correct in time. Even if it had, it wouldn't have made a difference. Simultaneously, his right swept in, sphere in hand. Shuodama Rasengan. For an instant, a moment, a sliver of a second, he thought he glimpsed relief on the baleful shadow's mangy muzzle. Impossible to tell. Her attack barreled forward a heartbeat later and obliterated the beasts. What was left of it pitched backward to the ground in a heap. Still, it wasn't yet dead, so he should probably finish it off. "Beloved." The word was colder than ice. Hold a moment. Something in Ranni's voice instinctively had him stepping aside, and well that he did too, because she came barging forward. "Hello, baleful shadow." She crouched down before the rabid mutt. "Be a good boy and deliver a message to your masters when you die, won't you?" It snarled wordlessly at her. Naruto turned away, knowing what would come next. Sure enough, he heard her stab her staff through the baleful beasts. There next, the beast expired with a rasping gurgle. Ranni didn't wait. Even as the crimson specter faded, she kicked it aside and rounded on him. Now then, where were we? Naruto gulped despite himself. Meep. Ranni jumped him.
Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification. So when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.